Part 87. Alien Relic Hunter. Author, Chen-Mi-san. Chapter 895. It seems that I guessed right. This hive is a large shelter. 33 nodded vigorously and agreed with some pride. What do these characters mean? Can they be translated? Kaylan asked, pointing to the inscription on the inside of the can. The 43rd batch is only for use by ground exploration teams, Ze Luo said. Only for the ground exploration team, Kaylan quickly imagined a picture in his mind. The surface of Alpha Planet was completely covered by ice caps, and the people living on this planet were forced to move into buildings built underground. Shelter life in the depths. However, long years have passed, and the environment on the surface has not changed in any way. The various resources in the underground shelter have gradually begun to be stretched. In order to prevent the shelter from collapsing, the managers had to form a ground exploration team and send people to the surface to collect information and resources. If this is the case, this ground exploration team is somewhat similar to the ruin hunters on the Ark. It seems that this kind of canned food should be regarded as a special offering, and the output will not be too large. 33 thought of something similar to Kaylan, the 43rd batch. It seems that this hive has already sent out to the ground past many exploration teams. These cans are not used to hold food, Ze Luo said suddenly. Why do you say that? 33 was stunned. Where did you see it? My intuition tells me that what is in this can is very dangerous, Ze Luo said seriously. Intuition. The corner of 33's mouth twitched a few times. These are just some empty cans with nothing inside. How can you perceive that the things inside are dangerous? If you say this can, there are also prefabricated fragmentation slots engraved on the surface, which may contain explosives, but the problem is that this thing is almost the same as the common food cans on the Ark, except that the tab on the lid may be a little different. 33 thought for a while, and took out a can of potato stewed beef brisket from his backpack. He tore off the label, shook the smooth can in front of Ze Luo, and said, "Then when you look at this can, do you feel any danger?" "That's not what I meant," Ze Luo shook his head. "It's just that when I stand here, I seem to be able to see. They are filling the cans with something that can make me feel dangerous." "You can see? Could this be the legendary sense of instant vision?" 33 immediately shifted the focus of his attention to Kaylan. "If it's convenient, can you tell me the origin of Ze Luo? Maybe she has been to this place before." "Even she and I don't know the origin of Ze Luo." Kaylan shook his head. When her self-awareness awakened, she was already on the altar built by the Arezaka Consortium. As for the Arezaka Consortium, the people inside who know her origins have all died in the East 9th District incident, even if there are survivors. Speaking of this, Kaylan suddenly let out a sigh. "Hey, I suddenly thought that the undead crew might know the true origin of Ze Luo. They originally sent the world to carry out the abandonment operation of the East 9th District module. Will they? Don't you just want to wipe out all the survivors of the Arezaka Foundation to prevent them from leaking this matter?" "Did the undead crew never mention Ze Luo later?" 33 asked curiously. "I mentioned it, but only once. They seem to have tacitly agreed to let Ze Luo stay by my side without any interference," Kaylan said thoughtfully. "The more I think about it, the more suspicious it becomes. After the East 9th District incident, those members of the Arezaka Consortium who stayed in other blocks later disappeared from the world, although it is impossible for these people to have access to secrets of this level based on their level. But judging from this method of eradicating the roots, it does seem to be immortal. The handiwork of the Crew Association. I thought for a while that the remnants of the Arezaka Consortium were purged by people from the heretical section. Ze Luo, I remember that you can have a spiritual connection with me, right? Then can you share this sense of instant vision with me?" Kaylan asked the Sanwu girl. "I'll try." After Ze Luo said this, he turned into the black liquid again and adhered to Kayan's back. Kaylan could clearly feel that countless fine tentacles penetrated from his neck, went all the way up along the cervical spine, and then drilled out from the gap under the occipital bone. carefully avoiding the rich blood vessels and nerves in the brain, and then penetrated several layers of ligaments and mucous membranes were penetrated, all the way to the cerebral cortex. An electric shock-like feeling came from his limbs, and Kaylan couldn't help but shudder, followed by waves of numbness in his scalp. Generally speaking, describing the brain as painful as a needle prick is a metaphor, but now Kaylan can really feel the feeling of those tentacles piercing the brain. Although Ze Lugo has tried his best to avoid important blood vessels and nerves, however, the strangeness coming from his brain still caused Kaylan to suffer from temporary facial paralysis. Fortunately, this strange feeling subsided before Kaylan was about to burst into tears. Huh. Kaylan gasped, "Spiritual connection, is it so exciting? Why didn't you feel this way the past few times?" "The past few times were shallow connections." Ze Lugo's voice rang directly in Ian's brain, "but I just tried it, and it was just a shallow connection that couldn't combine the pictures I saw and what I heard. Those sounds are shared with you, so only the deepest connection method can be used. If the connection is not made in the cockpit of the blasphemer mech, it will indeed make people feel uncomfortable, and it will also affect the mental strength of the connector. The weaker party causes irreversible damage." Irreversible damage, what does it mean? Kaylan subconsciously thought of the connection between himself and Valentina. If the spiritual connection is too deep and takes too long, the one with the weaker spiritual power will lose his complete personality. In other words, he will lie forever in the shadow of others, Ze Lugo explained. "I probably understand." Kaylan couldn't help but think of his first experience of encountering a black skeleton, which was in the number 9 cargo hold of the Pioneer icebreaker. Kaylan, who had not yet figured out his own abilities at that time, tried to control the black skeleton, but his self-awareness was almost swallowed up by a black hole that suddenly appeared in his mind. At that time, Kaylan thought that his consciousness was counter-invaded by the black skeleton when he invaded it. But judging from the symptoms of brain tingling at the beginning, he should have inadvertently interacted with the black skeleton at that time. Skeleton establishes a spiritual connection. The black skeleton had obviously lost its self-consciousness a long time ago, so what Kaylan came into contact with was a black hole, not another conscious body that could communicate. "Are you ready?" Ze Lugo asked. Kaylan nodded silently. A feeling that is difficult to describe in words suddenly spread, and Kaylan felt that his vision seemed to become blurry, but when the scene in front of him began to blur to a certain extent, he could vaguely see a humanoid shadows moved around the streets and factories. This image is very similar to the shadowy figure Kaylan saw in the memory fragments before, but there is a subtle difference between the two. The memory fragments are like short films that can only be seen at a specific time and at a specific time. Things and scenes in the place, and the sense of immediate sight that Ze Lugo shared with Kaylan is more like giving Ian's eyes the ability to go back in time, peering through the confusion of time and space to see what happened tens of thousands of years ago. The bodies of the workers who operate the capping machines seem to have been specially modified. Compared with the figures walking on the street, their shoulders and arms are more than a circle thicker, and the edges and corners are also very stiff, not like them at all. The roundness that biological limbs should have, just like the cyborg robotic arm on Leighton. Workers work in groups of 4. One person fixes the empty can on the machine, the other 2 work together to lift a seemingly heavy barrel-shaped container, and the last person uses a long drainage rod to guide the contents of the barrel into the empty can. Although he couldn't see clearly what was in the bucket, when the liquid was exposed to the air, Kaylan also felt an inexplicable palpitation. He didn't know whether this feeling came from himself or from Ze, who was connected to his spirit. Lugo, but all in all, when his sight was removed from the gurgling liquid on the drainage rod, he had a feeling of hairiness all over his body, and he wished he could immediately turn his sight elsewhere, or simply withdraw from the state of mental connection. Kaylan forced herself to stare at the workers' operations, pinching her thighs with both hands, not even noticing that her nails dug into her flesh through her pants and small pieces of blood stained them. Those workers acted very carefully, as if the liquid they were filling was nitroglycerin, but if it was really an inflammable and explosive substance like nitroglycerin, although it was very dangerous, Kaylan knew that he would never produce it. That feeling. There are a total of 16 cans in a batch. After filling, they have to go through a screening process. Only the qualified ones will be transported to other places by rail trains. The unqualified ones will stay and be carried on trolleys to the basement of the factory. Go inside. Kaylan really wanted to follow the cart to the basement to have a look, but in reality the entrance to the basement had been doused with molten steel. He could only watch the figure on the cart pass through the steel and disappear under the ground. What did you see? 33 on the side saw Kaylan walking towards the semi-open factory with wide eyes, and quickly followed him. I don't know what they are filling, but I also feel a bit of danger from that thing, Kaylan said in a very sure tone. After the cans are sealed, there is a quality inspection procedure. Qualified products will be transported away, and unqualified products will be sent to this basement, but this basement has been sealed with molten steel and cannot be entered. Then it seems we can only follow another clue, 33 answered. Can you keep up with the qualified products that were shipped away? Yes. Kaylan turned around and walked outside. After looking around, he selected a track leading into the distance and quickened his pace. The two of them walked through the second level of the hive city for a full half an hour before finally arriving at an empty square. But just as they walked out of the corner, 33 suddenly braked and fired hundreds of black flying blades. At the same time, the hidden pockets on his body shot out and floated 1 meter in front of him. What's wrong? Sensing that 33 was taking an attacking stance, Kaylan had a trace of doubt on his face. In the center of the square, there is a platform. Can you see it? 33's voice was very low. There is a lump on the platform, a lump of rotten meat. This lump of meat seems to be alive. Can you see? It's squirming slightly. A piece of rotten meat. However, what Kaylan saw was a little girl with long straight black hair, pale skin, slender figure, and was about 12 to 14 years old. Unlike the other figures, he could completely see the face of this little girl, so much so that when Kaylan saw her for the first time, he almost thought that this little girl existed in the real world and was not shared by Ze-Ludo. Your own sense of sight. She is so real that she is so incompatible with the foggy world in the sense of immediate sight. Ian's eyes moved towards the little girl's lower body. Don't get me wrong, he was not a pervert with some weird quirks, he simply wanted to know whether this little girl was a human or an alpha. But what makes Kaylan a little disappointed is that the little girl's body only has the upper part, just like a bust statue. Her waist is directly connected to a base, and there are many tubes extending from the base and inserted into her back and ribs. Some mechanical structures similar to powered exoskeletons covered her spine and limbs, and hard and cold metal restraints tightly pinched her pale limbs. A black robe was symbolically draped over her shoulders, and the outline of her bony shoulders was completely highlighted on the surface of the robe. A mask equipped with a ventilation valve and an oxygen supply tube was buckled on her face, covering most of her face. Only half of her small and delicate nose bones and a pair of big eyes with purple pupils were exposed. Even so, it can be seen that the beauty of this little girl is definitely not bad. If she can be a few years older, she can definitely be called a beauty that brings disaster to the country and the people, according to normal human beauty standards. Kaylan, what did you see? 33 asked in a low voice. No, to be precise, half a little girl. Half, 33 was stunned for a moment. Is it just that piece of rotten meat? I'm not sure. Kaylan shook his head. Just when he was about to turn his attention to other places to explore, the little girl suddenly raised her head and met Ian's eyes. She can see herself. Ian's heart was beating wildly. With just a look, Kaylan was sure that the other party could see him. Why? Why can she see herself? This is Ze-Ludo's sense of sight. Logically speaking, it should only be regarded as a one-sided peek by Kaylan and the others. From the perspective of a little girl, Kaylan cannot be observed. Why do you and her will there be this kind of confrontation between them, separated by countless time and space? Just when Kaylan was shocked, the other party spoke. Hello, I am the manager of the second level of the hive, Nieto. Alien Relic Hunter. Author, Chenmi-san. Chapter 896. Can you see me? Kaylan felt the hairs on his back stand on end and subconsciously put on a defensive posture. But soon, he realized that what he was talking to was not the long, straight black girl with only the upper body he saw, but that piece of rotten flesh in the real world. It's just that under Ziluo's sense of immediate vision, his understanding of the surrounding environment has changed. In his eyes, that piece of rotten meat in 33's mouth is the man who claims to be Nirvana, the little girl who asked for help. After the era of disaster, you are the first humans to enter the hive, Nieto said. Era of calamity, wait a minute, you said it was human. You mean, before the era of calamity, there were other human beings who came here? Or do you mean that the one who built this hive is human? Kaylan asked hurriedly. I can't answer your question, Nieto said. Why? Is it because my authority level is not enough? Kaylan tried his best to calm down. Since this manager named Nieto is willing to communicate with him, it means that she, may not have treated yourself as an intruder. Kaylan didn't want the negotiation to break down because he said something wrong. Even then, he had to at least get enough information before that. No, it's just that the information is too dangerous and may trigger another era of disaster, Nieto said calmly. That's something the person who created me didn't want to see. Does that information refer to forbidden knowledge? The era of disaster, could it be that the erosion level of the people living in this hive city has exceeded the critical point? Kaylan probed cautiously. You are trying to come into contact with something extremely dangerous, Nieto warned. Stop immediately, otherwise, according to my underlying logic program, I will forcefully perform memory erasure procedures on you and expel you from the nest. Okay, let's not mention this, Kaylan quickly compromised. Let's talk about something else. Are the two of us really the first human beings to come here after the era of disaster? That's right, Nieto answered simply. She is a bit similar to Ziluo. During the conversation, no emotion was shown from beginning to end, just like a computer program with beautiful girl stickers. Of course, from 33's perspective, hey Chang, the pictures of straight pretty girls have to be replaced with a squirming mass of rotten flesh. In the past few decades, at least a group of human beings should have visited this place, Kaylan said. They should be the first human beings to come here after the era of disaster, right? It is unknown whether Hruni and others entered the hive city of Kaylan, but the corpse that 33 encountered on the Genoa later must have entered the hive city, and it mentioned the hive city more than once. This term also refers to things in the hive. Logically speaking, the survivors on the two crashed battleships should be the first batch. No record. Nieto's answer was short and cold. There is no record. Is it because you were in hibernation at that time? Or was the memory related to it deleted? After I resumed operation in the 1065th year of the Quiet Era, I have not been dormant, and my memory has not been deleted at all, Nieto explained. It seems that as long as it does not involve those taboos knowledge, she will tell Kaylan everything. This is good news for Kaylan. As long as he doesn't step on the thunder, he can ask a lot of things he wants from Nieto, who is highly suspected of being a biological computer. Something to know. The Quiet Era? What era and year is it now? Kaylan asked again. This is the 547,661st year of the Quiet Era. Even if there are some things that cannot be asked directly, you can still get some pieces of information by making insinuations, and then piece these pieces of information together to restore the truth of what happened that year. Although the center of the puzzle is most likely blank, the edges are now that the corner is there. The missing content can be figured out by just guessing. Judging from the information currently available, this hive city has experienced at least 3 periods: the Ice Age when it existed as a refuge, the disaster era when super erosion or other large-scale disasters broke out, and the disaster era. The quiet era after the era of disaster. The people who once lived in this hive obviously either died in the era of disaster or left this place, and the manager Nieto in front of him should also be in the era of disaster from the appearance of that beautiful girl with long black hair to the current piece of rotten flesh. She also slept for a long time and did not wake up until the 1065th year of the quiet era, etc. If she comatose during the era of calamity, then why would she know that the time she awakened was the 1065th year of the quiet era? In the quiet era, those who created her and this hive obviously no longer exist, so who came up with the name quiet era? Are there other intelligent things here? Nieto just claimed that he is the manager of the second level of the hive city, so there should be similar intelligent biological computers as managers in other levels of the hive city, right? Did those guys tell her? But no matter what, there is at least one very important piece of information that Kaylan holds in his hands, that is, more than 547,000 years have passed since the end of the era of disaster. At this age, it is even older than the research the experts at the Institute estimate that the Alpha civilization will disappear on this planet much longer. In other words, this hive city was most likely built earlier than the remains of the Alpha civilization on the surface. I just don't know whether the Alpha civilization already existed during the Ice Age, or whether it was the one with the same name as this planet. Are the civilizations of China actually the latecomers? Kaylan really wanted to ask Nieto this directly, but he also knew that these questions would most likely directly touch the other party's minefield. If Nieto lost his patience for dialogue, it would be more of a loss than a gain. Kaylan thought to try again from another direction. There once was a man named Hruni. Did he come here? Hruni, he did come here and took away some important things from here, Nieto replied, but he and his companions did not enter the second level. They were only on the first level. I stayed for 3 days and then left. Then how do you say that we are the first humans to enter the hive after the era of disaster? Isn't the first level of the hive included in the scope of the hive? Kaylan asked. The slums on the Ark, no matter how dilapidated and poor the infrastructure, are still a numbered and recorded part of the Ark, even the kind that is located in the corner, full of toxic gases and waste, and is not suitable for human habitation at all. Unmanned blocks have corresponding block names of direction and sequence number. Only those transfer stations and various bases built in the wilderness will be counted as areas outside the Ark. But the first floor of the Hood city that the lifting platform just passed clearly belongs to the former. Structurally, they are also completely integrated. Of course the first level of the hive city belongs to the hive city, Nieto said, but when they entered the hive city, they were no longer human. This answer was a little beyond Ian's expectation. He originally thought that only individuals whose erosion level exceeded the critical value and turned into corroded corpses were not considered human beings. Unexpectedly, among the managers of the hive city, just suffering from erosion would be considered a human being. He will be expelled from his human status, but the problem is that his degree of erosion should be much deeper than that of Hruni and others. Why does Nieto still regard himself as a human being? Hruni's group, at least after they returned to Xiaojiangkai, they still maintained their human appearance and rationality for a long time. If they couldn't be considered human at that time, then Kaylan couldn't be considered a human being. Never mind. What exactly is Nieto's definition of human? How many people were there in this hive before the era of disaster, human beings? A total of 120 million, Nieto replied. 120 million? It seems that the overcrowding in the hive city is more serious than Kaylan and Sansan imagined. Unless there are many floors below, it is absolutely impossible to cram 120 million people into the first and second floors alone. Human. But in this case, another problem will arise. It is known that there is a very strict class system within the hive city, and people without sufficient authority levels cannot enter higher numbered classes, but any social structure, as long as there are classes, it must be a triangle. The top of the triangle symbolizes the people with the highest rank and the greatest authority in the social structure. This group of people has the smallest number, while the bottom of the triangle, the number of people at the bottom must be the largest. This is a rule that cannot be violated. Even among the swarms of insects, there can never be more rulers than the ruled. Even if there are third, fourth, fifth, or even more floors behind, even if the space of these floors is larger than the first and second floors, the number of people living in these floors cannot be greater than that of the first floor. Layer and more on the second layer. Ian's sociological knowledge only comes from some ebooks he read when he was bored, but these simple truths can be understood by an individual. The vast majority of wealth and power in a society will only be controlled by a small group at the top. In the hands of a small group of people, unless this society has reached the true meaning of G, preventing harmony, C, everyone understands. But hive society is obviously not. It is not even comparable to the Earth of the old era. Not to mention too many, the first two floors must account for at least half of the total population. It was hard for Kaylan to imagine what it would be like to have 60 million people crammed into these two levels of hive city. At this time, he suddenly felt that the illegal buildings growing like cancer cells in the first level hive city were not an exaggeration at all. Not only is it not an exaggeration, it is even a bit insufficient. Then in the later period of the era of disaster, no, I mean in the middle period of the era of disaster, how many people are left in the hive? Kaylan asked another question. This question is very sensitive, and there is a high probability that it is testing the edge of Nieto's minefield. But as long as Nieto is willing to answer this question, the gains will be worth letting Kaylan take the risk. 0, Nieto said. Although he was mentally prepared, Kaylan couldn't help but take a breath of air. 120 million people, all died in the early days of the era of disaster? During the rest of the calamity era, it was just a group of monsters lingering in the hive, or were they fighting each other? How long is the era of disaster? 4 years and 9 months. It was much shorter than Kaylan expected. If a large-scale outbreak of super-erosion really occurred in the hive city and spread in a manner similar to mimetic contagion, this time would not be short. You must know that the vast majority of people are resistant to erosion. Their abilities are not very strong. They may be infected just by seeing their mutated compatriots, or even just knowing about the existence of this thing from news reports. Then the infected individuals will see other people being infected. After you become infected yourself, it will in turn deepen your own erosion. It's like cross-infection in medical terms. Judging from the density of the population on the first and second floors of the hive city, once something like this breaks out, the situation will most likely get completely out of control before the managers know about it. Not to mention blocking information and isolating them. Even if they directly execute the affected individuals, it would still be too late. The entire nest is like a big sponge filled with water, and the erosion meme is a drop of extremely concentrated ink. When this drop of ink falls on the sponge, the black color that symbolizes infection will instantly spread all over the sponge. A corner. Unless, the managers of the hive city can choose to cut off the hero's wrists at the first moment of the incident, just like the undead crew destroying the East 9th District module, directly erasing the first and second floors of the hive city, then maybe they can still save the powerful people who live in a higher class. But judging from the intact first and second floors, either they did not issue such an order, or the meme had already spread to the upper levels of the hive before it was issued. It only took more than a year from the time Rooney and the others were eroded to the point where they were all reduced to corpses. If Rooney was excluded, the rest of the crew would only have lasted a few months. This nest can last for 4 years and 9 months, which can be said to be a miracle in itself. In the early days of the era of disaster, how did the last human disappear in the hive? Did he become a monster, or did he escape from here? Kaylan continued to push the question forward, constantly testing Nieto's bottom line. No one can leave the hive during the era of disaster, Nieto said. Managers at every level, including me, were out of control at that time. Why? Kaylan originally wanted to ask why he lost control, but then he thought, this question would definitely step into a minefield, so he could only swallow the second half of the sentence, then before the era of disaster? Can you tell me what happened? That information shouldn't be dangerous, right? You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Alien Relic Hunter. Author, Chenmi-san. Chapter 897. I can't answer your question, Nieto repeated the sentence. Why this time? Those things shouldn't involve the dangers you mentioned, right? Kaylan asked doubtfully. According to my calculations, if this information is disclosed to you, it will most likely trigger a series of chain reactions, causing disaster to strike again, Nieto said. The way of thinking of this biological computer is very close to that of humans, Kaylan thought, although the things he asked about had nothing to do with the disaster itself, he could piece together the disaster through various clues. Silhouette comes. If Arisualogo hadn't been watching from the side, Kaylan would have thought that this biological computer named Nieto had invaded his mind and read his inner thoughts clearly. In this way, Ian's plan to tell a story was completely in vain. What Nieto said just now is probably all the information that can be revealed to him within the allowed range. If he continues to ask, it is estimated that the other party will not only continue if you refuse to answer, you will even undergo so-called memory erasure procedures. Kaylan didn't know how she could clear her memory, but after all, she was on someone else's territory. Kaylan didn't want to break up with Nieto unless she had to. Then what information is safe, can you tell me? Kaylan thought for a while, and instead of constantly testing it himself, it would be better to just let the other party tell him everything he can. However, Nieto did not respond to the sentence. He just looked at Kaylan silently. From her calm eyes, Kaylan could not see anything. Kaylan didn't know whether Nieto's artificial intelligence only set up a passive question and answer function or his own questions had crossed the line. He could only be patient and continue to think about those questions that could get Nieto's answers without it will involve those disasters. Then can you tell me about the Hive Capital's authority level? Kaylan thought of the sentences that Logo had deciphered before, and decided to use this as a breakthrough to see what information he could get out. Okay, Nieto finally said, the Hive City's hierarchical system was officially promulgated in the 4th year of the Ice Age. This system divides the residents in the Hive City into 6 levels. Permission Level 1 is the owner of the Hive. It has the highest authority and can directly control managers at all levels, including me. Authority Level 2, Managers, has a total of 4 places, located on the 1st to 4th levels. Among them, I am the 2nd level manager. Permission Level 3, high-level residents can enter and exit all places at will except the 4th floor, and have the power to kill and kill residents of levels 5 and 6. Level 4 of authority, armed personnel, is responsible for protecting the residents of the Hive City in the first 3 levels, maintaining the order of the Hive City, and is commanded by the managers of Level 2. Armed personnel are mainly located on the 2nd and 3rd floors of the Hive. They are strictly prohibited from leaving their garrison posts without permission. The Cotter class among the armed personnel also has the status of senior residents. Permission Level 5, middle-level residents, are only allowed to move on the 1st and 2nd floors of the Hive City and are responsible for production work. However, they can become Level 4 armed personnel through selection and training, with higher treatment and status. Permission Level 6, lower-level residents are those with genetic defects, physical disabilities, or serious illnesses who are unable to work. In addition, Middle-level residents will also be demoted if they lose the ability to work or violate the laws of the hive city. Bottom dwellers. Bottom dwellers are placed on the first level of the hive. According to records, the population of the first level of the hive city is generally around 40 million to 50 million, and the historical peak has reached 70 million. 70 million people who are unable to work. Kaylan muttered, although it may be a bit cruel to say this, the remaining people have to feed so many people who are not engaged in production, plus the armed personnel and soldiers who are also out of work. I'm afraid it will be very difficult for high-level dignitaries, right? The best solution is to exile those people who cannot feed themselves. Although the chance of survival on the ground is very low, it is at least better than staying in the hive and starving to death. This is just like the current situation in the wilderness. Among the exiles, even though the mortality rate is high and the quality of life is very poor, at least many of them survived and established a foothold in the wilderness. Although Ian's voice was so quiet that only he could hear it, and even 33 standing aside was unaware of it, Nieto still answered his doubts. No matter how many residents there are at the bottom, according to the regulations, the nest only the minimum amount of food and other daily necessities for 10 million people will be supplied to the first level. 10 million people? Then many people will starve to death every day, right? Kaylan couldn't help but frown. The corpse will be transported to the recycling device for decomposition and processing, and every part will be put to its best use. Nieto's answer was still emotionless. The corner of Ian's mouth couldn't help but twitch. He originally thought his idea was a bit cruel, but he didn't expect that the management of the hive city would be even more ruthless. But Kaylan had to admit that if he wanted to allow civilization to survive in the apocalypse, only cold and tough methods would do. A manager with a woman's benevolence would only bring the entire hive to ruin. Go into a situation of no return. Residents at the bottom also have the opportunity to restore their status as middle-class residents, or even directly become high-class residents, Nieto added. Join the ground exploration team. Although Nieto hasn't said it yet, Kaylan has already guessed the answer. That's right, Nieto said, as long as they can find resources of sufficient value on the ground, or information that is considered useful by management, the bottom residents who join the exploration team can be promoted based on their contribution. This is also the bottom level. The only way residents can escape their situation. What is the survival rate of the ground exploration team? When Kaylan asked this question, he was also calculating the return rate of the ruin hunters on the Ark. Of course, he was not calculating the return rate of the current hunters. It's the return rate of hunters in the years after Ark first landed on Alpha Planet. In those days, the profession of ruin hunter was basically equated with outlaws, and few people who were not desperate would join this profession. According to archival records, a total of 619,559 bottom-level residents joined the ground exploration team. 93 people were able to successfully return from the ground. Nearly 620,000 people, only 93 people can return to the hive alive. If you were a low-level resident of the hive city, you probably wouldn't join this ground exploration team. The information Nieto disclosed this time was not small, and it was very complete and detailed. Kaylan thought about it in his mind and gave each class a title of Earth civilization in a more understandable way. Level 1 Emperor, Level 3 Nobles, Level 4 Army, Level 5 Workers, Level 6 Meat Animals. As for Level 2 Managers, they are obviously intelligent biological computers like Nieto. Strictly speaking, it can only be regarded as an extension of the Emperor's will and cannot be counted among the residents of the hive city. According to what you said, the hive has a total of 4 floors, right? No, it's the 5th floor, Nieto corrected. It's just that the 5th floor in the deepest part of the hive is no man's land, and there are only 4 floors that can accommodate humans. How about the 4th floor? Can you tell me this? The first level is the bottom nest located at the top of the hive city, the second level is the lower city area, the third level is the upper city area, and the fourth level is the cloud top. Nieto answered. Judging from the name alone, the structure of this hive seems to be upside down, but judging from the distribution of the power structure of the residents, it is completely consistent. One more question: why can I open the door to the hive city and enter the hive city? Is it because of my blood? Nieto didn't answer, but he didn't refute either. In K. Ian's view, this should be regarded as acquiescence to his own statement. The lifting platform stopped after it reached this level. It's because with my blood, I can only be regarded as a middle-level resident with authority level 5, so I can't go to the upper city, right? Wrong. Nieto took a deep look at Kaylan. Although her face was still expressionless, Kaylan always felt that she seemed to be conveying something to him through her eyes. The lifting platform cannot go to the third floor. It's because the third-level managers have completely lost control. As for your authority level, I can't judge. It can't be determined. Then how do you determine whether it's friend or foe? Kaylan asked curiously. If it were the Ark, if an alpha man accidentally broke into the interior of the Ark, even if he wouldn't open fire directly, he would definitely be surrounded by long guns and short cannons. The long guns and short cannons here refer to the real guns and cannons in consciousness, rather than the microphones and cameras held by reporters and photographers. But along the way, he and 33 encountered no obstacles. Only those who harbor the seeds of disaster will be considered enemies, Nieto said. Seeds of disaster? Does it mean erosion? But both himself and 33 should have been eroded, but it hasn't shown on the outside yet. Could it be that this seemingly awesome intelligent biological computer is actually a guy who judges books by their appearance? What about Rooney and the others? They are enemies, but they have not entered the second level of the hive, so I cannot clear them out. Nieto answered immediately, very simply, and without any delay. What about the manager of the first level of the hive? Why didn't it get rid of Rooney and others, but put them back? The managers on the first floor of the hive have been destroyed, and the entire first floor is currently without a manager. And my authority cannot be extended to the first floor, so I can only let them leave. So that's it? Kaylan nodded. Judging from the information obtained so far, the cloud top on the fourth floor of the hive city, which is where the people with the highest authority in the hive city live, should be where he came. Destination: but the lift platform cannot go to the third floor, and naturally it cannot reach the fourth floor below the third floor. You just said that the third-level managers have lost control. What do you mean? Nieto didn't answer. Did it rebel? Nieto still didn't answer. The third floor, is it dangerous? It's very dangerous, Nieto said. There are still disasters there. Remaining, disaster. Does this mean that there are corrosion on the third level? Or is it that the managers of the third level were eroded and turned into monsters similar to erosion? Wait a minute, I want to confirm something with you. Kaylan suddenly had an idea and asked, as the manager of the second floor, your authority is limited to the second floor. Things on other floors, you have no right to interfere, right? Correct. Then if I want to go to the third floor, even if I may cause the second disaster on the third floor, as long as it is not within your control, you will not stop me, right? My mission is only to ensure that the second level of the hive is not threatened by disaster. After you leave the second level, I will not interfere with any of your actions, Nieto said. Good. Kaylan shook his fist hard in his heart. This intelligent biological computer seemed very smart, but in fact it had a fatal flaw. She only cares about matters on the second floor of the hive. As for the other floors, it has nothing to do with her. To use an old saying, this is an AI that only knows how to sweep the snow in front of itself. I think the owners of the hive city designed these ACE in this way to prevent the managers of these layers from interfering with each other, and also for security a management network that connects the entire hive city. The former is obviously more likely to fall into the management mode where the layers are separated independently. Then can you tell me, besides the lifting platform, Are there any other passages to the third floor of the hive? Nieto was silent for a long time, seeming to weigh the pros and cons. It took more than half a minute before it gave Kaylan a definite answer, okay. Half a minute is already a very long thinking time for an intelligent biological computer. Kaylan doesn't know what calculations Nieto did in this half minute, but in short, it is willing to tell another channel himself, that Ian's goal has been achieved. Go along number 3 street to the edge of the lower city. Go all the way to the end. There is a garbage disposal plant. The garbage disposal plant has a one-way passage that connects directly from the uptown to the lower city. This passage was originally used to transport the upper city. Domestic waste in the urban area is transported to Xiakan district for processing, but now the one-way channel and the garbage treatment plant have stopped operating. As long as you can break the 6 one-way valves in the channel, you can reach the upper city area in reverse. Nieto's explanation was very detailed. It was as if its own will also wanted Kaylan and the others to go to the upper city. Garbage passage. Kaylan pondered, yes, it is a bit troublesome to use the lifting platform to transport garbage. In addition to the lifting platform, the passage connecting the 2 levels of the hive city only contains garbage passages, ventilation ducts, and the like. There are 2 more things I need to tell you in advance, Nieto suddenly added. What 2 things? The first thing, after arriving in the upper city, don't look up at the dome. The second thing, no matter what the manager of the 3rd floor says to you, don't listen, don't believe anything she says, and don't accept anything she says. Suggestions or help? Okay, I understand, but isn't the 3rd floor under your control? Why are you telling me this? Nieto remained silent again. This time, she simply closed her eyes and stopped even looking at Kaylan. Alien Relic Hunter. Author, Chenmi-san. Chapter 898. Nest City, 2nd floor Xiakan District, number 6 garbage treatment plant. According to the information provided by Nieto, this garbage treatment plant has a total of 4 garbage transfer channels. 2 of them have been blown up in Calamity era and are impassable. One of them is specially used to transport high-risk garbage and waste materials. Very dangerous, and only the last passage is barely walkable. This should be it, Kaylan said, looking at the rusty passageway with a diameter of 10 meters in front of him. After spiritually connecting with Luo, he also obtained a kind of weapon that can understand the use of the residents of the Nest City. The ability of writing, the inscription on the ground clearly states that this is the exit of the channel number 1 mentioned by Nieto. This is a one-way passage with the exit in the lower town and the entrance in the upper town. In the past, the garbage generated in daily life in Shangcheng district would be transported here. After simple processing and packaging, it would be put directly into the channel. Then, the garbage treatment plant built in Xiakan district would conduct more detailed screening and select those valuable items. They should be sorted into categories. As for the real garbage and scraps, they will be incinerated or landfilled. Of course, in such a hive city where even the corpses of residents have to be put to good use, there are very few things that can be called garbage and waste in the true sense. This is true from the garbage treatment plant. This can be seen from the ultra-small incinerator, which is so clean that there is not much residue inside. At least in Luo's sense of sight, Kaylan had never seen this incinerator being used. Even if there is really no value to be found, if you throw it into the bottom nest, the residents at the bottom will fight for their heads. Even if it is a stone, those who are crazy about hunger will not be able to help but lick it. A few mouthfuls, trying to find some food residue stained in the cracks. Although the probability of this kind of thing is lower than winning the lottery, every time the garbage in the lower city is packed and thrown into the bottom nest, it can trigger a burst of looting. It even cost a few lives. But no one thinks there is any problem with this kind of thing. Even if several people died in the last looting, the same plot will happen again next time if garbage is thrown into the bottom nest. Everyone is struggling desperately to survive. Joining the surface exploration team is a struggle, and fighting for garbage is also a struggle, but compared with the former, the mortality rate of the latter is simply negligible. Thinking of this, Kaylan suddenly became very interested in those ground exploration teams who returned to the nest alive. Those who could survive this exaggerated probability could not be exaggerated to say that they were the chosen ones. Based on this survival rate, the surface of Alpha Planet at that time was simply more dangerous than the S-class ruins. By the way, if the garbage is sent from the upper city below to the lower city above, it shouldn't be as easy as throwing it directly into the pipeline, right? 33 looked at the depths of the dark passage and said, either there are lift-type carrying platforms, or anti-gravity devices or launching devices push the garbage up. As for the one-way valve mentioned by the manager, it is probably used to prevent scattered garbage from falling. Probably. Kaylan nodded, took out a breathing mask, fastened it on his face, and walked in first. This garbage channel has been idle for hundreds of thousands of years. Even if there are garbage residues in it, it has been completely degraded. However, toxic and harmful garbage goes through another channel. There are toxic substances and odors in this channel 1. The chance is very small, but having said that, I have to mention the sense of immediate vision that Ze-Loto shared with Kaylan. Although it is called sense of sight, the senses are not only vision, hearing, smell, and touch will all be affected. Kaylan can hear the sounds from hundreds of thousands of years ago, and the shadowy figures on the street. When it hits or passes through his body, he will feel a very subtle strangeness, as if a cold ghost has passed through his body, and at the exit of this garbage transfer channel, before even getting close, Kaylan could already smell the disgusting stench. He could see a lot of garbage wrapped in polymer films and formed into huge balls being pushed out of the passage. However, where the force pushing the garbage came from could not be seen from the sense of sight. Kaylan could only. It is speculated that it should be some kind of mechanical device. After all, in this hive city, there are many places where anti-gravity devices can be used, but Kaylan has not seen them. From this, it can be determined that the civilization that built the hive city did not master the technology associated with it. Why are you wearing a gas mask? 33 followed Kaylan, looking at the environment in the passage, and asked a little strangely, there is no smell in here. Besides, with your physique, you shouldn't be afraid of toxic gases, right? You can't smell it, but Ze-Loto can smell it, and even I can smell it, Kaylan said somewhat depressedly. Ze-Loto smelled the smell of garbage through the sense of sight. It is equivalent to this odor signal being formed directly in the brain. Unless Kaylan can directly block the related modules in the olfactory center, he will not be able to block the smell even if he wears 100 layers of gas masks. Although the population of Shangcheng district is only 1/20 of that of Xiakan district, it consumes hundreds of times as many resources as Xiakan district, and its living conditions are also as high as those of Xiakan district. Through some garbage bags with damaged membranes, Kaylan even saw a cowboy bone that had not yet been chewed, and a cupcake with only a spoonful of cream on the top. Not only food, but also all kinds of clothing. Even from the perspective of a resident with a normal living standard on the Ark, many of these things cannot be called garbage at all. Another garbage bag was pushed up from the bottom of the passage. The surface of this garbage bag was not damaged, but Kaylan could still see through the almost transparent wrapping film and see the contents inside, a sapphire bag studded with diamonds. The long dress of a high-colored dress with no visible damage on the surface. There was only a little dirt on the skirt that seemed to be wine stains. This kind of clothing could be said to be a luxury item on the Ark, let alone this one. It was used as a sanctuary hive. It seems that the level of luxury in Shangcheng district is far higher than Kaylan originally imagined. While people in the lower nest are eating people and people are starving to death every day, while the residents in the lower city are working early and late in the factory to squeeze out their lives for the meager food and right to live, the people in the upper city are still holding cocktail parties, eating expensive steaks and red wine, listening to elegant retro vinyl records. Even though Kaylan knew that the civilization that built the Hive City was most likely a compatriot from Earth, he still couldn't help but feel a strong sense of disgust in his heart. A civilization like this, a Hive City like this, is actually quite good if it is destroyed. The things in these garbage are things that people in Xiakan District and Daikyo don't even dare to think about. They don't even know that Kayadu has the ability to produce these things. If they knew, Kaylan probably saw it before. It won't just be a gathering of people to protest. Kaylan didn't tell 33 these things. 33's character is very similar to that of an old dog. Although he usually seems indifferent to things that have nothing to do with him, he is actually a jealous guy in his heart. Telling him what happened would only make him more troubled. What's more, after reaching the third floor, even if Kaylan didn't say anything, 33 should be able to see what the living standards of the residents in the upper city are like and the huge gap between them and the lower city. Kaylan sighed imperceptibly and continued to walk forward. The hard soles of his boots stepped on the rusty passage wall, making a dong-dong sound that continued to spread along the passage wall. This garbage transfer channel does not go straight down, but slopes. At the exit, it is at an angle of about 25 degrees with the ground. The further you go in, the steeper the slope becomes, after walking 200 meters forward. After that, the slope had changed to nearly 45 degrees. Kaylan and 33 don't have the kind of hook boots specially used for climbing, nor do they have equipment such as gecko suction cups. Fortunately, Zelo's space power can be used on both of them. Steps were formed under his feet, so that the two of them would not slide down the passage wall in embarrassment like they were on a slide. This passage is really long. By the way, did the manager tell you how deep the third level of the hive is? 33 asked. I didn't say. Kaylan shook her head, but she told me that this garbage transfer channel is 17 kilometers long. This journey is not short. 17 kilometers, if all calculations are based on the initial angle of 25 degrees, the sine function is 25 degrees, well, the multiple is about 0.42. Then it must be 7 kilometers deep. Look, the upper city and lower city are far enough apart. Are you worried that the people below will riot and dig through the partition between the two floors? 33 joked. The height of the Bencheo space is about 1,000 meters, and the height of Xiakan district is about the same. However, the thickness of the partition between Bottom Nest and Xiakan district is only about 60 meters. If people living in Bottom Nest can get a piece of excavation equipment, it doesn't have to be too high-end. Just a single-person operation model like the Gold Digger 3 commonly used by miners on the Ark, can drill through this area in a month. Layer of rocks and enter the lower city area. If you want to drill through the rock formations from the lower city area into the upper city area, I am afraid that only a shield machine can complete this task. Not to mention, there must be an isolation layer made of metal between the upper city and lower city, or other means to prevent residents of the lower city from digging tunnels to sneak across. Speaking of which, this passage was almost empty. I didn't see anything along the way. I really don't know how the upper city brought the garbage up. Did it use the force? 33 shrugged. 17 with a kilometer-long pipeline, even if you install a rocket thruster on a garbage bag, it would still be awkward. I guess this question can only be answered after seeing the first one-way valve. As soon as Kaylan finished speaking, the road ahead was cut off. You've really opened your mouth. It's not just Leighton. I think all the members of the Hunting God hunting group are crows, right? 33 raised the tactical flashlight above his head and looked at things not far away. Said. This is a metal ring slightly smaller than the diameter of the channel. It must be the one-way valve that Nieto said. But this valve was in an open state, let alone closed. Even Kaylan didn't see the door panel. Is it just such a ring? 33 walked to the middle of the ring. Where did the door panel go? There doesn't seem to be a part on this ring to connect the door panel or a gap for the door panel to hide in. This door doesn't have a door panel to begin with, Zelo suddenly said. This is actually an accelerator, which uses technology similar to the Voyage Stargate made by humans to impose an accelerator on things that pass through it. The thrust of one-way movement is just like the Stargate pushing the arc away from the solar system. It's just that the power of these accelerators is very small, not even 1/1000th of that of the Stargate. Stargate, 33's mouth twitched twice. In a hive where even the lifting platform is a purely mechanical structure, there is such a technology. And it is also used in the garbage transfer channel. This. K. Landau was not too surprised. Theoretically, if the people who built the hive were really the Earthlings on the escape engineering ship or their descendants, then they might indeed possess such technology. After all, these people were probability was involved in building the Ark and Stargate and maintaining them. The mini Stargate in front of him has obviously stopped working. 33 has traveled back and forth several times, but nothing happened. If it was still working, the moment 33 stepped into the ring, he would be trapped. Pushed directly to the exit of the channel. No wonder it's called a one-way passage. It turns out to be such a design. Kaylan nodded secretly in his mind, looked at the scrap mini Stargate for a few times, and continued to walk forward. But he didn't go far before he was forced to stop again. There was a deviation in the information given by Nieto. Channel 1 was also not intact. About 1 kilometer deep, the entire channel had collapsed and was completely blocked by broken rocks. What should I do? 33 glanced at Kaylan and asked, do you want to dig it up? The amount of work is too big. Even if Zlogo is here, we will have to dig until the end of the year of the monkey. Kaylan sighed, we can only turn around and go back to try our luck at the last passage. The last channel is the number 4 channel dedicated to transporting hazardous waste. P.S. Thanks to Tianyi for the 500 starting coin reward for her barbecued pork buns. Thank you to Minjai Uman for the 100 starting coin reward. Alien Relic Hunter author, and Chenmi-san. Chapter 899. Channel 4 is not together with the 3 conventional garbage channels number 1, 2, and 3. Instead, it is located in the deepest part of the garbage treatment plant. The corridor leading to this channel is covered with various kinds of garbage. Warning slogans all mean the same thing. Danger ahead. Non-staff members are allowed in. Staff on duty at Channel 4, please pay attention to checking protective equipment and weapons. If there is any abnormality, report it immediately and close the safety gate. And so on. I can understand wearing protective equipment after listening to K. Ian's translation. 33 nodded and said, after all, hazardous waste is either toxic and harmful substances to the human body, or radioactive waste, but why bring weapons? Can trash also jump up and bite people? This passage is more than 10 kilometers long and can be regarded as a relatively simple small ecological circle. Although it is impossible for ordinary organisms to survive in this environment, anything that can survive in this passage they must all be monsters that have mutated so much that their original appearance cannot be seen. Kaylan said, the purpose of carrying weapons is to prevent these mutated creatures from running out of the passage, right? For example, a mutated rat that is covered in rotten flesh, covered with radioactive ore crystals, and stands taller than a human, 33 said in a low voice. Have you ever seen this kind of creature? Is it an indigenous creature from Alpha Planet? Kaylan asked curiously. 33's description is very detailed, and it doesn't look like a random monster image, but Kaylan has no matching name in his mind for a creature that fits this appearance. Even the ones he has seen, there aren't many similar monsters in movies. I've seen it, but it's not an indigenous creature from Alpha Planet, but a mutated Earth creature. 33 recalled, that was the first mission I received after I transferred to the Airborne Rapid Reaction Force. At that time, I have only been in the army for less than a year and can only be considered a rookie, so I have a very deep impression. Being able to serve in the field force for a full year can already be regarded as a big shot in the eyes of the people in the garrison. Kaylan couldn't help but complain. In his opinion, 33 was definitely being self-effacing. Say it. Although the airborne quick reaction force of the field force is not the top elite, it can definitely be regarded as a front-line combat force. At least it is much stronger than the force that Lao Go led before. 33 ignored K. Ian's complaints and said as he walked, it was a 6-month confidential mission. The captain told me that the combat intensity of the mission would not be very high, so we did not carry too many heavy weapons. But on the contrary, the environment at the mission site was extremely harsh. Every soldier participating in the mission was issued the top-notch individual protective clothing at the time, and each squad was assigned a field-type pollution treatment vehicle. This configuration, it seems that the mission location is in a heavily irradiated area, Kaylan answered. That's right, 33 nodded, deep in the prismatic basin. Although Kaylan has not heard of this place name many times, as a ruin hunter, he still has some understanding of the characteristic places on the surface of Alpha Star. Although the prismatic basin is not a relic of the Alpha civilization, this place was artificially created by the Alpha civilization and is not a natural landform on planet Alpha. According to experts, the prismatic basin may have been originally used by the Alpha civilization. Come to a garbage dump where radioactive waste is concentrated. However, under the multiple effects of tens of thousands of years of wind, sun, and geological movements, the soil cover covering the radioactive waste collapsed, forming a huge crater with a diameter of hundreds of kilometers. In this crater, prismatic structures can be seen everywhere. Crystals with strong radiation are exposed on the surface, which is where the name prismatic basin comes from. After taking a look at the warning signs that he couldn't understand on both sides of the corridor, 33 continued, this is a cooperation mission with the Institute. A research team from the Institute is going to conduct field work in the prismatic basin. During inspections and experiments, our mission is to protect the personal safety of the members of this research team. What happens next? Kaylan asked, since the mutant rat left a deep impression on 33, then the process of this mission shouldn't be too uneventful. The researchers brought more than a dozen cages of white mice to serve as observation subjects. They injected half of the mice with Radio-9, and the other half of the mice were injected with substances extracted from the body of the prismatic scorpion synthetic preparation. I remember those researchers called it reducing serum. Because at that time I was responsible for guarding the makeshift biological laboratory, so the whole experiment was conducted under my nose. Oh, by the way, that edgestone scorpions are indigenous creatures that live in prismatic basins and are said to even feed on radioactive waste. 33 took a breath and continued, after injecting the two preparations, they put the mice outside and allowed them to move around on their own. Of course, each mouse was implanted with a tracking device and chips that monitor body status. I can almost imagine the next plot development. Kaylan muttered, in that kind of environment, the reliability of the chip must be a mess, right? Yes, not only the chip, but also the drone used to receive the chip signal crashed several times in the prismatic basin. In the end, we had to switch to manual tracking. A total of 120 white mice were after being injected with the reducing serum of prismatic scorpions. I remember that the number of survivors was exactly 70, but 2 months later, we only recovered 36 of them, whether they were living specimens or corpses. Kaylan, nearly half is missing. Although the found mice have varying degrees of mutation, they have not developed highly threatening attack organs. Neither the research team of the Institute nor us are aware of the danger. In addition, there is still more time before the end of the mission. After 4 months, they immediately decided to continue further research based on this part of the data. As for the white mice that had not been found, they became the task of the team that patrolled every day. But one day in the middle of the 5th month, the patrol team that day did not return to the camp until the handover time in the evening, and the communication could not be connected due to radiation interference. Although this kind of thing is rare, but it happened several times in 5 months. At first, we thought they were just lost, but after a half-hour timeout, the captain decided to send 2 teams to find them, and I was among these two teams. We only found the corpses of that team, each of them chewed beyond recognition. Judging from the bite marks on the armor, it was a huge rodent that killed them. Those mutated white mice, Kaylan pursed his lips. The plot is a bit cliché, but if it can be made into a movie, the visual effects should still be very good. If the bloody and terrifying factors are not considered, it should be very popular. Yes, but we failed to find the murderers who killed this team, so we could only return to the camp to report the situation. That very night, the camp was attacked by a group of mutant rats. 33 took a deep breath. His tone turned slightly pale. We thought at first that even if those missing white mice mutated, there would only be 34 in number at most. But we forgot one thing, that is, they have extremely strong, reproductive capacity. There were at least 2,000 mutated rats that attacked the camp, each of them over 1.5 meters in length. I don't know how they grew to such a size in the barren prismatic basin. There is a lack of water and food here. In 5 months, 34 palm-sized white mice turned into 2,000 giant mutant mice. It's hard to believe, but it happened. As mentioned before, we did not carry heavy weapons. The most powerful weapons were grenades and undermounted rifle grenades. Even if the rifle grenades hit directly, it would be difficult to kill a mutated giant rat. The camp's defense line only lasted less than 5 minutes. Was breached. Fortunately, after we reported the situation, the captain had already issued a message requesting support to his superiors. Not long after the battle began, a high-speed battleship came to support the camp, but at that time, the living people in the camp were also together. There are no more than 10. No wonder you are so impressed, Kaylan sighed. These people in the Institute are really the kind of people who commit suicide that I am always familiar with. By the way, how many of their people have died? They are all dead. Those mutant giant rats seem to have a certain degree of intelligence. Their priority targets are the biological laboratory and the researchers wearing white protective clothing. Soldiers like us wearing orange protective clothing are obviously not their first targets. One target, these mutant giant rats seem to be here for revenge. What is the original purpose of this project? To develop a new generation of anti-radiation agents, Kaylan suddenly asked. No, I have glanced at the computer screens of those researchers a few times. Their mission seems to be to study biological weapons that can survive in high-intensity radiation environments. 33 replied. Then I can only say that I will die. Kaylan curled his lips and said, you will not survive if you do your own thing. After telling 33's story, the two of them had almost reached the end of the corridor. This was a hall divided into multiple blocks. On the left side was a row of vertical cabinets used to store equipment, and on the right side was a room. A shower cubicle for cleaning. Naturally, this shower cubicle is not used for bathing, but for washing away radioactive dust or other contaminants on protective clothing. But now these shower cubicles it has collapsed to pieces. The metal partitions have fallen to the ground in various directions. The protective film that originally covered the surroundings has also been torn into tatters. As for the water pipes, they have been riddled with rust. Several sections of water pipes have been riddled with holes. They have all disappeared, leaving only a thick layer of rust mixed with dust on the ground. 500,000 years, this hall has not completely collapsed. It can only be said that the civilization that built this hive city is still very capable of construction. As for the desolate scene in front of him, in Ian's opinion, it was similar to the city called Pripyat on Earth, but the photos he saw were only of the latter city that had been abandoned for dozens of years due to a nuclear accident. What it will look like in the next year. And this hive city has to add the word 10,000 after decades. I've started to feel some tingling on my skin, 33 said. He zipped up the protective suit, pulled up the hood, and covered his entire head inside, leaving only half of the breathing mask exposed. The heavy-duty protective clothing they wore when they first entered the grey mist forest has long been left behind. Now the only thing they can take out is this portable protective clothing that is as thin as sun protection clothing. Kaylan rummaged through the equipment cabinets and did not find the protective clothing left by the Hive civilization. This place had been evacuated. Unfortunately, he could only see the scene of this hall when it was in normal operation, and we cannot see what happens here when disaster strikes. Be sure to inject anti-radianin and anti-radianin on time, Kaylan said, and walked straight forward. The radiation protection ability sometimes seems a bit useless, but sometimes, it is really useful. After passing through the hall and climbing over 2 unmanned security gates, Kaylan and Sansanzan finally arrived at the exit of Channel 4. The channel wall of Channel 4 is made of lead plates with graphite cores sandwiched between them, and a thick layer of concrete is poured on the outside of the channel. This structure is somewhat similar to the nuclear power plant reactor on Earth. 500,000 years have passed. Why is the radiation intensity in this place still so high? 33's voice sounded very dull through the breathing mask. Is this really just a channel for transporting radioactive waste? Take uranium, the most well-known radioactive element, as an example. Among the 3 isotopes of uranium, the half-life of uranium-234 is 270,000 years, the half-life of uranium-235 is 710 million years, and the half-life of uranium-238 is as high as 4.5 billion years. For these elements, 500,000 years is not a very long time. Kaylan gave 33 popular science tips. What's more, we still don't know what elements are contained in the radioactive waste of this hive city. There are some elements that have even longer half-lives than uranium. Compared with these things, a person's life is really a blink of an eye. 33 sighed casually, and then took out a short axe forged from nano alloy from his waist, held it in his hand, and said to Kaylan, nodded and said, "Let's go. No matter how strong the radiation is, we can only endure it with courage. It's okay for me. This dose of radiation is like scratching an itch for me," Kaylan said. "On the other hand, if your body can't bear it, don't hold on. You can't risk your life for such a small thing. It's okay, it's just that my skin is a little itchy, and my back feels a little hairy. Compared with the environment in the prismatic basin, there is still a gap." 33 lifted a strip of the breathing mask and quietly wiped away the water that had flowed to it. Nosebleeds at the lips. P.S. Thanks to Yolofuun for the 200 starting coins. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Alien Relic Hunter, author, and Chen-Mi-san. Chapter 900. Compared with when they explored passage number 1 before, the two of them were more cautious this time, because Kaylan saw some disturbing pictures in the sense of sight. It seemed to be a routine maintenance of the passage. 4 armed personnel wearing protective suits that looked like powered exoskeletons and holding guns in their hands walked at the front. Behind them, there were 6 people carrying various tools and equipment. Staff of. The protective suits worn by these staff members were several sizes smaller than those worn by armed personnel. Not only were there no armor plates, they did not even have power modules. Coupled with the heavy maintenance equipment, the pace of the 6 people seemed extremely strenuous, and soon they were separated from the 4 armed men in front. The 4 armed men in front stopped and urged impatiently, but when they came back, no one among them was willing to reach out to help the stragglers. They just stood there with indifference. A few complaints came out of his mouth from time to time. This is a very standard 10-man team. The one at the front obviously has the status of captain. In addition to firearms, the weapon in his hand also has a sword-like melee weapon, but these people, their figures were all shrouded in a thin layer of mist, and Kaylan could only roughly see an outline, but could not clearly see the details of their appearance or equipment. Kaylan tried his best to maintain the same forward speed as the 10-man team, following behind them unhurriedly, and moved towards the depths of the passage. "Hurry up! Don't waste time," the leader of the 4 armed men, the captain, turned around and shouted to the 6 panting staff behind him. There are still 2 hours. It's almost time for dinner, and if we miss the time, those bastards won't leave food for us. After hearing that they might not eat, the 6 people moved faster obviously, but it didn't take long before they returned to their original slow pace. After all, the physical exertion was real, even if they wanted to. If you go faster, you will have more ambition than strength. Finally, amidst the complaints and curses of the armed men, it took the 10-man team a full hour to reach the first one-way valve. According to the conversation between the team members, Kaylan knew that it was the first one-way valve that failed. Their mission was to find the cause of the failure and repair it. Work quickly, the captain put the long knife in his hand on the ground and shouted loudly. The other 3 armed men dispersed with their guns in hand. They each found a direction to stand and looked around cautiously. The one-way valve is much dirtier in the instant sense than in reality. All kinds of garbage fill every gap in the mechanical structure. Even the hatch used for maintenance is covered with a large piece of black. The filth was stuck in it. If the staff wanted to open it, they could only use a hammer to break up the hardened filth, and then use a shovel to scrape it off bit by bit. Hurry up, time is very tight, the captain knocked the ground with the blade of the knife, and a dull sound suddenly spread deep along the metal passage. The sound waves bounced back and forth between the walls of the passage, making a gudong sound. The sound sounded like a huge monster swallowing something, and the passage they were in now was the giant monster's esophagus, and the deep darkness was connected to a wriggling stomach. Bag. This imagination made Kaylan feel slightly uncomfortable. He withdrew his gaze from the darkness deep in the passage and focused on the workers who were working. 2 people were still prying the deformed and stuck access hatch, while the other 4 were using special tools to clean out the garbage stuck in the gaps and corners of the valves. At this moment, a bright flash of light suddenly flashed under the beam of the flashlight. Orange, a staff member immediately squatted down and stretched out his hand towards the orange thing. It was a whole orange, not even the skin had been peeled off. One side of the orange was slightly dented due to the collision, but it was not rotten, and there were no visible mold spots on the surface. This was a very fresh orange. A fruit of this quality, even on the Ark, was not ordinary. Residents can afford it every day, let alone a hive city that is extremely short of resources. As for why a fresh orange appeared in this channel dedicated to handling hazardous waste, Kaylan can only think that there was a mistake in the garbage classification in Shangcheng district. The oranges that were originally supposed to be domestic garbage and those hazardous wastes were mixed together. Kaylan clearly heard the sound of swallowing saliva coming from the throat of the worker who picked up the orange. He looked around and saw that no one noticed his actions, so he quickly wiped the orange with his palm and planned to stuff it into your own pocket. At this moment, another staff member suddenly flashed behind him and grabbed his arm. "What are you doing?" the man who picked up the orange asked in shock and urgency, but had to keep his voice low to prevent more people from discovering what was going on here. "I still want to ask what you are doing." The voice of the worker who held him was also very low. As he spoke, he also tugged the former's wrist forcefully. "This is what I picked up. Don't grab it from me." The man who picked up the oranges was eager to stuff the oranges into his pocket, but his hands couldn't hold them back at all. Under the latter's clamping and pulling, the whole person collapsed. He couldn't move his arms at all. And he didn't dare to struggle much. If he attracted the attention of those armed men, not to mention the oranges would definitely be gone, and he would inevitably get a severe beating. "Are you humming, stupid? I didn't say I wanted to snatch this crappy orange from you," the latter cursed in a low voice, his tone full of annoyance. "Then let me go. Just pretend you didn't see anything and do what you should do," the man who picked up the orange immediately answered. "I said, you guys don't want to live anymore? You don't even think about where this is. Can you still eat the oranges picked up here?" The latter did not let go, but continued to maintain a stalemate. "This orange is not rotten, and there is no dirt on the surface. Why can't we eat it?" the man who picked up the orange said confidently. "At worst, I will rinse it with water later to wash away the radioactive dust on the surface. Just drop it. Do you know how long it's been since I've eaten this kind of fruit? Are you really not afraid of death? Before the latter could finish his words, he stumbled and fell to the ground. The captain of the armed men had already walked behind the two of them without knowing it. He lowered his head and stared at the man squatting on the ground, holding an orange tightly in his hand. "Bring it here," the captain said in an extremely impatient tone. The worker who picked up the orange hesitated for several seconds, and then reluctantly handed it over. "Huh." The captain took the orange and let out a puzzled sound in his nose. He seemed to be wondering why an intact orange appeared in this hazardous waste disposal channel, but doubts were still doubts, and he forgot to give the worker a kick and kicked him to the ground like the other worker. The strength of his kick was not small. The first worker who was kicked couldn't get up after 5 or 6 seconds. As for the second person, Kaylan clearly heard the crisp sound of his bones being broken by the kick. The captain didn't seem to care that the worker's injury would slow down the progress of the work. He seemed to have determined that the team would miss the meal they were waiting for. However, he was still quite satisfied with the unexpected discovery of oranges. Although Kaylan couldn't see his face clearly, he could more or less feel part of the emotions of the characters who appeared in the sense of immediate sight as long as he stared at them for a period of time. Just like the worker who picked up the oranges, his current mood is full of resentment, while the captain has a hint of joy in his irritability. Kaylan didn't know whether the pleasure came from the violence or the orange, but in short, the captain did not throw the orange away, but carefully put it into a pocket. "Boss, what did that kid pick up?" an armed man who was closer asked. "Isn't it some kind of glowing radioactive waste? Last week, an idiot secretly took out the radioactive waste he picked up, causing more than a dozen workers in an entire dormitory to suffer from acute radiation sickness. If this happens again, we will definitely be criticized to death by the people above. Don't worry, it's just an orange." The captain waved his hand, indicating to his subordinates not to worry. "Oranges? Why are there oranges here?" The subordinate was obviously a little confused. "Maybe there was an error in the garbage disposal equipment in the uptown area. It's a pity that it happened to be in this damn passage number 4. Even the inside of the outer skin is definitely full of radiation." The captain patted his pocket, "but with a little processing, you should be able to sell it for a good price on the black market in the lower city, and those gangs might even fight over this thing." "Boss, you have made a fortune," the armed man said with some envy. "Why don't you treat me to a nice meal?" "Humph, how much do you think an orange can be sold for?" The captain, who was still saying it can be sold at a good price a second ago, suddenly changed his face. "I'll have to pay a lot of money to treat you losers to dinner. You kid really dare to say that?" "Boss, you are as stingy as ever." Halfway through the word door in stingy, a black shadow suddenly passed over his head. The armed man's words stopped abruptly, and then also disappearing was the upper half of his head. The body with the Tianling cap cut off fell straight down. The captain was stunned for a moment, and then shouted loudly, "Under attack! Everyone, move closer to me immediately. Execute response plan No. 1. Kaylan didn't see the shape of the black figure clearly, and couldn't even see its general outline. Zhang could only stop reality, and Luo shared with Kaylan the sense of immediate sight, even in a stagnant state. The black shadow is still in that blurry state and will not become clear due to the freezing of the picture. Kaylan feels that these senses of instant vision are most likely derived from the memories of those who have seen these scenes. There is no true appearance of the black shadow in their memories, and Luo who read these memories naturally, it is impossible for Kaylan to see things in these memories that even the creator of the memories has not seen. The remaining two armed men quickly picked up their guns and ran towards the captain, but the staff were in a mess. Kaylan couldn't help but shook his head after just one glance. "Captain, the so-called number 1 response plan should be some kind of plan that has been practiced in advance to deal with emergencies. However, judging from the performance of these staff, either there has been no actual practice at all, or the quality of the personnel is too low. Too bad. It was only then that the worker who picked up the oranges climbed up from the ground unsteadily, but before he could stand still, the black shadow passed directly through his chest, and the hot blood suddenly shot out more than 10 meters away. Fire! I tell you to fire! The captain held up the tactical flashlight and swept the beam of light around randomly. The other hand held the sword and waved it nervously in front of him. At this time, Kaylan discovered that the sword seemed to be a chainsword driven by an engine. As the captain waved, the friction sound of the chainsaw continued to come from the sword shrouded in mist. But, that thing, we can't lock the target. If we fire randomly, we will hurt our own people, another armed man holding a gun said urgently. It's already this time, why do you still care about this? The captain inserted the flashlight into his waist, picked up the gun hanging on his chest with one hand, and fired at the high-speed moving shadow. However, none of the bullets fired from the gun could hit the black shadow that was only the size of a palm. Instead, it knocked down 3 or 4 staff members who were unable to dodge. Open fire, you guys. Crossfire and block the movement path of that thing, the captain cursed while firing. Have you forgotten all the things I taught you in the training camp? P.S. Thanks to Bare Hand respecting the year's W for the 200 starting coins, thank you to SD for the 100 starting coins. P.P.S. I would like to add that the residents of the nest, including the second-level manager Nieto, use a language developed based on their unique writing. When Ze-Logo deciphers this after learning the language, he completely mastered the language after just a brief exchange with Nieto. Therefore, there is no communication barrier between Kaylan, who is now mentally connected to Ze-Logo, and the nest civilization. As for language logic, idioms, and some specific vocabulary, it is purely for the convenience of reading, so the novel is directly presented in Chinese. Please do not pick out the words. Alien Relic Hunter. Author, Chenmi-san. Chapter 901. After being yelled by the captain, the armed men suddenly picked up their guns and fired wildly as if they were awakening from a dream. However, they did not hit the black figure until they emptied the magazines of their guns. Instead, they killed him again. Several teammates died. The so-called one-way valve is just a slightly raised annular structure on the inner wall of the tunnel. There is no shelter at all here. Except for one staff member who fell to the ground in time, everyone else was more or less close to it. Several shots were fired. The firearms used by these armed men were extremely powerful. Even if they just grazed the body, they could tear off a large piece of flesh and blood. The arms and legs would be broken with just one hit. If they hit the chest and abdomen directly, it can even cut the whole person into 2 pieces. The power of these firearms is roughly equivalent to the 0.5-inch caliber heavy machine gun on the Ark. Fortunately, these armed personnel are wearing powered exoskeletons. Otherwise, the terrifying recoil may not be suppressed by human body strength alone. Live. If I had known I would encounter something like this, I should have brought shotguns or grenades, the captain cursed angrily while changing the magazine, but before he could change the second magazine, the black shadow had already jumped up to him. In front of him, a big bloody hole opened in his neck. From the death of the first armed man to the complete cessation of gunfire, there was only a total of 20 seconds. The entire 10-man team was wiped out, and the sense of sight that Ze-Logo shared with Kaylan also disappeared. Kaylan is basically certain that the so-called sense of immediate vision should be the memories of those living in the hive. The 10-man team was wiped out, and their memories end here, so the sense of immediate vision naturally cannot be used. Present the scenes behind them to Kaylan that they can no longer see. What did you see? Seeing Kaylan let out a long breath as if he was relieved, 33 knew that he had withdrawn from the sense of immediate sight and asked quickly. A 10-man team was attacked by a palm-sized shadow at our current location. In 20 seconds, 4 armed personnel and 6 maintenance workers were all wiped out, Kaylan said. A black shadow the size of a palm, 33 muttered, "Is it a mouse? Don't you have the ability to stop time? Can't you even see the true face of that black shadow clearly? It's not very useful to stop in the sense of immediate vision." Kaylan shook his head. "This thing is like a film that has been shot. There are things that were not captured clearly in the original film. No matter how many times I press it is impossible to see clearly even after pressing the pause button. As for the camera that shot the original film, I guess it should be the eyes and brains of those attacked, because after the death of the last attacked, the sense of instant vision, the picture disappeared. Then if that black shadow appears in front of us, you should be able to see clearly what it looks like." 33 looked around with some vigilance. "Although hundreds of thousands of years have passed, but there's no guarantee that thing, or that thing's descendants are still hiding in this place. Don't be nervous. I asked Zelo to set up a space barrier around us. Even if we are attacked, the space barrier can block those things," Kaylan said. "I know, this thing is much better than the energy shield." 33 nodded. "I'm not nervous, I was just thinking, in 5 months, the mouse can mutate into that look. So what if it's 500,000 years, will they evolve intelligence? For example, rat men. It seems, you have successfully integrated into us and truly become a member of the god hunting group." Kaylan suddenly showed a wry smile. "What do you mean?" 33 was stunned for a moment, obviously not understanding why Kaylan suddenly brought up a topic that seemed to have nothing to do with the current conversation. "Your mouth is also an illuminated crow's mouth," Kaylan sighed. "Zelo told me that directly ahead, in the darkness about 200 meters away, there were 6 heads with humanoid torsos lurking, but there are creatures with a huge rat head, and it's obvious that they have discovered us." "Ha, that's what it means." 33 suddenly felt dumbfounded. "There are only 6 heads. Then we are divided into 4 and 2, you are 4 and I am 2. Anyway, Zelo is attached to you, so you are 2 people. You are not suffer a loss. You're not as nervous now. I can feel that your heartbeat seems to be much more stable than before." Kaylan glanced at 33 from the corner of his eye and teased. "The unknown is the easiest thing to scare people. Now that I know what I have to face, it is not so scary." 33 touched the back of the hand axe and lowered his voice. "Don't forget, I was once a soldier who had experienced many battles. I think they have also noticed that we have discovered their existence," Kaylan whispered, arching his body slightly. "Their heart rate is speeding up, they are moving." Chaotic footsteps like raindrops suddenly sounded from the depths of the passage, mixed with chaotic echoes, and quickly approached Kaylan and 33. In less than 3 seconds, the one at the front rat man had already crashed into the light of their tactical flashlights. It's very different from Zelo's description. This is a big rat that can stand on 2 feet, with extremely long soles and toes. Only the soles of their front feet are on the ground, and the heels are lifted upwards. The entire ankle looks like an insect's anti-joint. This structure allows their legs to explode with extremely terrifying power like springs. Rather than running, it would be more appropriate to describe their movement as jumping. These rat men are stooped, with their spines bent to almost a 90-degree angle, and their upper bodies leaning forward. Even so, their height is still close to 2 meters. If the spines can be straightened, the entire body will be if fully upright. The height of these creatures can easily exceed 3 meters. It was fully twice the size of the mutated giant rat that 33 encountered in the prismatic basin. The rat man's body is covered with dirty, thick gray long hair, but the long tail trailing behind him has no hair at all, only clusters of neoplastic tumors and rotten and oozing wounds. This fact is quite consistent with the most of the patients with acute radiation sickness that Kaylan has seen are somewhat similar. In the sick village, there are countless people with such symptoms. But unlike the patients, these rat men have extremely developed muscles, and their strength and speed are far beyond the reach of radiation patients who are approaching the end of their lives. But judging from the explosive power of sprinting, these rat men it is at least the level of a 6th to 7th level enhanced person. Their heads are covered with white bone helmets that fit closely to their heads. These bone helmets tightly wrapped up the only part of their body that could be related to the image of a mouse, except for the tail. Only a few long beards poked out from the gaps in the front of the bone helmets. What surprised Kaylan the most was that these rat men actually held crude weapons in their hands. There were broken steel pipes, iron pieces with extremely sharp edges, metal blocks removed from who knows what. There was even a chainsword that was so rusty that the chainsaw had broken. They know how to use weapons and tools, which means they are intelligent creatures. 33 really got it right? But before Kaylan had time to tell 33 this, these rat men had already rushed forward and swung their weapons towards the two of them. The space barrier successfully blocked the first round of attacks. These rat men seemed surprised as to why the two invaders in front of them had shields invisible to the naked eye. After the first round of attacks was ineffective, they quickly retreated. He opened a distance of more than 10 meters from Kaylan and the others, and made a rapid and threatening babble sound. "Can you understand what they are saying?" 33 asked. Neither Kaylan, 33, nor Zeelugo made an attack just now, with the combat power of the three of them, against these rat men whose individual strength is about the same as that of a 6th or 7th level enhanced human. Any one of them would be able to attack. If you pick one up, you can kill it in an instant without even spending any effort. For them, these rat men are not considered a threat. "I don't understand." Kaylan shook his head. "The same goes for Zeelugo. We are not Doraemon, and we don't have anything like translating bread, so how can we understand the mouse?" "What translation bread?" 33, who neither likes watching cartoons nor collects cultural antiques from the old era, was confused by Ian's sudden new vocabulary. "Nothing. It's just a virtual prop in the comics." Kaylan shrugged, indicating that 33 shouldn't care about such a trivial matter. "Then should we take action now?" 33 did not like to complain and ask questions like the old dog, and quickly brought the topic back to the main business. "These rat people seem to be very afraid of us. Try grabbing one first." As soon as Kaylan finished speaking, Zeelugo's space power condensed into an invisible big hand and grabbed the strongest one with the rusty chainsword in his hand. Of rat men. No matter how much the rat man struggled and screamed, it could not break free from the constraints of space power. Kaylan just pulled the immobile rat man in front of him with a gentle pull. The other 5 rat men looked at each other in panic, turned around and ran away. But the next second, they hit an invisible wall solidly. While Kaylan used the power of space to catching rats, he also created a trap for the other 5 ratmen using the power of space. The condensed cage trapped them inside. "Are you planning to dissect them?" 33 glanced at the rat man lifted in the air by the power of space, and then at the other 5 rat men who were bumping around in the cage. No knowing why, he suddenly felt that these terrifying creatures were gradually becoming no different from the harmless mice in the laboratory. This is probably the special feeling brought about by the suppression of power, right? Any fear comes from lack of firepower, and there is not much difference between firepower and strength. "I wanted to tear off this guy's mask first, but the bone mask seemed to be on his head," Kaylan said. "At first I thought it was the skull of the same kind of remains they picked up, and it was put on my own head." The mask he refers to the white bone helmets that the rat people wear on their heads. "The one that grows on the head should be considered an exoskeleton, right?" 33 was slightly startled and said subconsciously. "Maybe." With a blood-curdling tearing sound, the rat man's bone helmet was torn off by Kaylan with brute force. After the bone helmet and the rat man's head were separated, the rat man's bone helmet was torn off with brute force. The person finally stopped struggling and completely lost his life. "Well, it's really an exoskeleton, and part of the brain tissue is attached to the inner surface of this layer of skeleton." Kaylan glanced at the torn off bone helmet. "It seems that I just tore off this guy's Tianling cap." "It's not the Tianling cap, but the entire upper half of the skull." 33 pointed at the bloody head of the dead rat man and said, "This bone even includes the upper jaw of this creature. You look, from here to here, there is a complete oral structure, and you can even see a muscular tongue, but the base of the tongue has been torn off by you. Seeing that Kaylan didn't answer, 33 turned to look at Kaylan with some doubts, only to realize that Kaylan was staring at the rat man's brain tissue in a trance at this time, not knowing what he was thinking. You don't want to eat it, right? Thinking of what Kaylan did on the second floor of the Babel Tower, 33 suddenly felt like something was churning in his stomach. Fortunately, it had been a while since the last time I ate, and there wasn't much food left in my stomach. There was only a stream of spicy sour water rising up my throat. To be precise, this is not called eating, but absorbing. Kaylan sighed, no way, the information we have now is pitiful. Otherwise, do you think I like to do this kind of thing? The blood-like living armor seeped out from Ian's pores, turned into a palm, and grabbed the apple-sized rat brain tissue. The next second, countless small hollows appeared in the bright red palm. The tentacles pierced deep into the brain tissue. The information contained in the rat man's brain was very messy. Kaylan only felt dizzy, and double images appeared in front of his eyes. After a while, he calmed down, shook his head at 33, and said, "They are overestimated, these rat people are not intelligent creatures at all. They only have animal instincts and do not have the ability to think like humans." However, Kaylan continued, "There was a memory fragment in my mind that was unsealed just now. The Alpha civilization seems to have come into contact with this kind of creature and named them tunnel dwellers." Alien Relic Hunter. Author, Chen San. Chapter 902. Tunnel Dweller, this name is quite vivid. As soon as you hear it, you know it is a creature that lives in the tunnel. 33 looked at Kaylan, but found that the latter's face became very ugly, and said in shock, "Why? Is there any other, unexpected information?" The tunnel dwellers, they may not have been mutated from irradiated rats, they were once residents of this hive city, Kaylan said in a somewhat uncertain tone. "What? Is this the disaster that Nieto said?" 33 felt that his heartbeat seemed to have missed a beat. When he looked at the 5 tunnel dwellers trapped in the space cage, the eyes have undergone tremendous changes compared to before. No. They are the ones who escaped the disaster. Kaylan shook his head. "What do the memory fragments unlocked in your mind say?" 33 asked. "It's a note. Judging from the narrative tone, it seems to be written by the last survivor of the hive city." Kaylan thought for a while and said, "In addition to the tunnel dwellers, there are some other things. I still think it's all. Let me read it to you." Content of the memory fragment, a fragment of an unsigned note. "I call those people tunnel dwellers. This is not a derogatory term. I have always had high respect and admiration for them. They were the most sober people in the hive. When disaster struck, they did not panic, nor did they throw themselves into the arms of his like some cowards and those with weak wills. They have strict thinking, logic, and almost harsh discipline. Any member contaminated by the disaster will be ruthlessly eliminated, but it is useless. The power of his is too terrifying and difficult to understand with our cognition. Even the blind, deaf, or even in a vegetative state cannot escape disaster. Disaster is like a super virus that can transcend the limitations of time and space, spreading crazily throughout the hive. His will sweeps over all, praising the great true God. No, damn. Why do I praise him? It seems, the erosion is deeper than yesterday. I don't know how long I can stay awake. Maybe, when I blink next time, I will become a part of the disaster. I thought my will was strong enough, but in the face of disaster, I realized that I was just a weak person. No, not even a weak person. His will alone is enough to crush our entire civilization. This is the complete suppression of low-dimensional creatures by high-dimensional creatures. To him, we are like little people painted on a canvas. He can arbitrarily change our appearance into strange creatures, or he can simply and neatly erase us completely. No one can compete. No. I can't waste any more time. I should record everything as much as possible. If anyone who comes after me can see this record, maybe it can help them. If there are any latecomers. Although the tunnel dwellers tried their best to resist the erosion of disasters, the results of their efforts were minimal. The entire hive has become a paradise for disasters to dance, and the territory belonging to the sober people continues every day being eaten away. Even fighting can't do it. People controlled by disasters will be driven by instinct to infect more sober people. If you want to stop them, you must organize an army and establish a defense line. However, in the face of disasters, whether it is an army or a defense line, all have become consumables. The consumables here do not refer to normal battle losses, but no matter how many soldiers are invested, these soldiers who are invested will inevitably be swallowed up by the disaster. They are just the price to slow down the spread of disaster. 1/3 of the soldiers will be infected as soon as they witness the disaster. From this time on, their humanity will enter a countdown, and the remaining soldiers, in the process of fighting the disaster, there is no way to avoid the fate of being infected. The only choice for the entire army is to fight the disaster to the last person. What makes people feel a bit sad is that these troops who were thrown into the battlefield as expendables, but the soldiers who remained conscious in the end, often died at the hands of their comrades who fought alongside them not long ago. I know, that feeling must be very uncomfortable. But what is even more pity is that the torn flesh cannot be thrown into his arms and become part of his supreme consciousness and body. This loss is unbearable. Their lives have simply lost all meaning. What am I talking about? How much time is left for me? What followed was a long period of blank space and silence in the middle. Kaylan heard the sound of rapid breathing and the sound of a sharp weapon penetrating the body. I pierced the sarcoma on my shoulder with a military thorn, and the severe pain briefly awakened my brain. I always felt that it wasn't a sarcoma, it was a developing brain, my second head. I can even distinguish its facial features. It is not yet mature, but it already has a will of its own. I can see it smiling at me, and the twisted lips under the mucous membrane split open, revealing the stain inside. Bloodshot white teeth. Perhaps, I should have cut it off when it first grew out, but at that time, Dr. Boson told me that this sarcoma contains several large arteries, and if it was cut off hastily, it would probably lead to uncontrollable disease. Heavy bleeding. At that time, we had lost the hospital and all medical supplies, and everyone, including me, had been infected. It was only a matter of time for us to die or become part of the disaster. There is no point in excision, there is no point in treatment, there is no point in survival, there is no point in civilization. Today is the longest I've been awake in a few days, but I don't think I'm getting better. In my eyes, those people who have become weird seem to be becoming more and more normal. On the contrary, the people who are not infected look so scary, terrifying and ugly in my eyes. There is always a voice in my heart telling me, turn those people into our appearance. But I know, I'm a monster, I'm a monster, I'm a monster. My body is covered with sarcomas, my body is covered with brains. But I don't want to cut them off. As a human being, it is normal only if the body is covered with heads, and a human being with only one head is a monster. Why should I impale that head on my shoulder? Why should I do this? Why do I think this way? No, I'm a monster. Those horrible and ugly people, they're the normal ones. I used to be like them. I should write this down and tell. Who should I tell? Long stretches of blank space and silence, heavy breathing, and the squirming sounds of sticky flesh. In K. Ian's memory fragments, the picture he can see is just an illusory, boundless paper, but what is written on it is an extremely standard printing font. Other than that, what can still be heard are some intermittent sounds, which are probably the ambient sounds of the author of this note when he was recording. They fought and retreated, their soldiers finally exhausted. No one was willing to take up arms anymore. They believed that resistance was pointless. But they didn't give up. After discovering that the note was still continuing, Kaylan breathed a sigh of relief. The second paragraph had a longer blank space than the first. Kaylan once suspected that the author of the note had lost his rationality, but fortunately, he also haven't given up yet. The words on the paper are still increasing, and Kaylan continues to read to 33. With the last hope of the Hive City, they retreated into the passage originally used to transport garbage. Although they knew that the lower city had already fallen to the disaster, this passage was relatively safe. There is no one in the garbage channel, and it is safe without anyone. People are the carriers of disasters and the most direct medium for them. However, when they retreated into the garbage channel, there were people in the place where there were no people before. This is a paradox. Any place with people is unsafe, so no safe place can have people. From a human perspective, there is no safe place. Some people were desperate and blew up the passage, choosing to resist the disaster by dying, but those who entered passage number 4 made new discoveries. There is no one in passage 4, but there are some things that are usually not noticed by the residents of the uptown area. This was originally a garbage channel used to transport energy waste in the upper city. A large amount of radioactive material remained in the corners of this channel, causing the entire channel to become a heavily radiated area. But areas with severe radiation are not equivalent to restricted areas of life. The great thing about life is that it is possible to create miracles in any desperate situation. Those creatures underwent huge mutations under the influence of radiation, but the mutations not only did not kill them, but also gave them the ability to survive the radiation. In a sense, this is not mutation, this is evolution. The sober people who entered Channel 4 blocked the entrance and exit of the channel and reversed the direction of the one-way valve on one side. In this way, no matter whether they entered the channel from the entrance or the exit, when they reached the first one-way valve, the force exerted by the valve will push out the channel. They were safe, for now. But if no one replaces the one-way valve with a new energy module outside, this safety zone can only last for 5 years at most. I don't know how many times they tried in the past 5 years, but in the end, they chose to edit the genes of those mutated organisms into their own genetic sequence. They would rather become monsters deformed by radiation than become puppets of disaster. They succeeded, but they also failed. In the end, they did not become slaves to the disaster, but they were completely reduced to irrational beasts. This is an attempt to represent human determination and dignity. I shouldn't laugh at them. I can't laugh at them. I owe them the highest respect. They may have found a solution to their problem, but maybe they're just a little short, just a little short. Maybe this is fate. Except for them who became tunnel dwellers, everyone in the entire nest has been completely swallowed up by the disaster. If latecomers can read this note, they may be able to find some clues to solve the problem from the tunnel dwellers. They are the group of people closest to success among us. The third paragraph is left blank, and the breathing sound is deliberately lowered and sounds very nervous. I heard footsteps coming downstairs, and it seemed to be a conscious person. I couldn't let him know that I was hiding here, but I couldn't let him choose this house as his temporary hiding place. When I was awake, I had to find a hiding place that was secretive enough. I circulated among the buildings. In the process, I not only had to be careful of those who had become the minions of the disaster, but I also had to avoid those who had become the minions of the disaster. I am the same sober person. Because I don't know when they will fall into chaos. And when I lose consciousness, my identity will change from prey to hunter. Although I don't know what I did during that time, I woke up several times and found that my limbs were stained with blood stains, broken meat, and even fragments of internal organs. There are my own and there are other people's. The distortion in my body is getting more and more serious, and the time I wake up is getting shorter and shorter. When I can no longer wake up, it will be the time when I completely become a part of the disaster. That may be a kind of relief, give up my own consciousness and integrate into his thinking. Maybe I can find the truth that humans have been pursuing for countless centuries. No. I shouldn't think so. He is tempting me, he just needs nourishment to grow stronger, not. There are no gods or believers in this world, only predators and prey. The law of the jungle is an unshakable law of nature. The so-called civilization has deceived us for too long, making us mistakenly believe that we can solve problems through means other than strength. Our civilization is like a joke in the face of his power. I don't know what the situation is like in other hive cities now. It may be better than ours, or it may be worse. Kaylan was stunned for a moment. Other hives, does this sentence mean that there is more than one hive? Did this suspected human civilization that once lived on Alpha Planet build many shelters like this? Our nest city has been completely destroyed. Fortunately, we have sunk it to the bottom of the sea before this. No one can bring the disaster out of this place, everyone who leaves will be crushed by the sea water. This is the last thing we can do. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Alien Relic Hunter. Author, Chenmi-san. Chapter 903. It turns out that the reason why the Hive City is located underground in the Undersea City. 33 murmured, it is because the people living in the Hive City were completely desperate in the face of the disaster and chose to put the Hive City deep into the seabed. Billions of tons of seawater have sealed the disaster here, but this person has recorded so much, but he hasn't written down what exactly this disaster is about. 33 took a breath and continued, from the literal meaning, disaster seems to be the erosion, super-erosion and human body erosion caused by the forbidden knowledge, but judging from the description of this recorder, it seems that something is different. I think he deliberately didn't write it clearly. Using the word disaster to refer to that thing can, in a sense, block the spread of disaster. Kaylan thought for a while and said, cognition is pollution. He left this record to warn later comers. If he had described the disaster in detail, the latter would have been affected by the disaster when they read this record. Devoured. That's right. 33 sighed, this note seems to reveal a lot of information to us. In fact, there is very little useful content. He mentioned these tunnel dwellers again and again. We have found a way to resist the disaster, but the problem is that these tunnel dwellers themselves have turned into half-human, half-mouse monsters. Do their methods really have reference value? Kaylan did not answer immediately, but turned around and observed the tunnel dwellers who were frantically hitting the space cage, and fell into deep thought. 33 did not disturb Kaylan. He himself was also thinking about the content of the note just now, but the more he thought about it, the more he felt that this matter was completely unsolvable. That kind of desperate atmosphere, even more than 50 years apart 10,000 years ago, it still made him feel the same, the feeling that no matter what he did, it was of no avail. 33 had already experienced it once, and he didn't want to experience it a second time. 33 shook his head vigorously and kicked a pebble away from his feet with some annoyance. I seem to have been infected by that emotion. 33 murmured in his heart. Although he did not directly see the text and those voices in the note, just through Ian's narration, the contents had already been revealed to him. He had a huge impact. Vaguely, he seemed to be able to feel that he had touched a period of history that lasted for more than 500,000 years, despair, disorder, blood, madness. He could completely imagine what happened after the entire nest city fell. How the person who was swallowed up by the disaster spent the last time of his life, but he didn't want to think about it. He knew that if he continued to think about it, even if the degree of erosion did not deepen, there would probably be some problems with his mental state. The undead crew should know about this note. I even think that they have obtained the records and data of the experiments conducted with the tunnel dwellers. Kaylan, who had been silent for a long time, suddenly said. Why do you think so? 33 was startled. They may indeed have seen the memory fragments in your head, but how can they get the things related to the tunnel dwellers? No one from the Undead Crew Club has apart from us, The only people who have been to the Hive City are the officers and soldiers from the crashed battleship of Rooney. However, they were not able to return to the Ark until they died, nor did they have any contact with the people on the Ark. This makes no sense. The tunnel dwellers method is probably to use genetic rewriting to block the physical mutations caused by the disaster at some level. In layman's terms, it's a bit like fighting fire with fire, because of the conditions in the passage are limited, so the only genetic samples they can obtain are those mutant creatures living in the passage, but for the Undead Crew Association, their range of choices is much wider. Kaylan slowly said, he said, then pointed at himself. 33's eyes widened, his mouth opened, and after a long time he said, "You, the symbiote is the product of a mixture of alpha and human genes. You are the successful sample. No wonder you have been exposed to so much forbidden knowledge but still haven't broken through that critical point." Yes, Kaylan nodded, but we cannot rule out another possibility, that is, someone in the other hive has made similar attempts and brought the results out. I feel more and more that this world seems a bit unreal. 33 smacked his lips and said, according to what you said, we humans actually evolved as early as 500,000 years ago, or even earlier. We have arrived at the Alpha planet and built multiple hives on this planet. Until this immigrant civilization was destroyed due to a disaster, those alpha talents who came out of nowhere occupied the magpie's nest. Became the master of this planet. Even the two most critical resources of alpha civilization, energy crystals and nano-alloy, are actually the legacy left to them by this human civilization. However, 500,000 years ago, humans at that time. Although the history of mankind is millions of years old, the history of human civilization is very short. Even if we count the 900 years that the Ark drifted in the universe, it did not exceed 10,000 years. Human beings just 500,000 years ago learned to use stone tools and fire, let alone interstellar travel. Even a modern person living in the 21st century would be regarded as a god by these primitive people if he traveled back in time. It's not impossible. Kaylan held his chin and said, I once had a hypothesis, that is, hundreds of thousands of years ago, a group of primitive humans on the Earth were abducted by alien civilization. This alien star civilization can be any powerful and unknown civilization in the universe, or it may be the great god who, for some reason, such as for an experiment, imprisoned these abducted humans on Alpha Planet, and these primitive people gradually developed their own civilization on Alpha Planet. Due to different environmental conditions or the interference of alien civilization, the development speed of this human civilization is far faster than that of their own on Earth. Of the same kind. Kaylan paused and then said, you must have heard of the controlled variable method, right? The humans on Earth are like a control group without intervention, while the humans on Alpha Planet are the experimental group with added variables. While the vast majority of humans on Earth were still eating raw materials and drinking blood, humans on planet Alpha had already entered the glorious industrial age. However, after experiencing one incident, I completely rejected this speculation. What's the matter? 33 asked. In the Super Dream video of the 776 Special Forces team, I saw some steel structures inside the ruins with the inscription Chinese Heavy Industry. The inscription was printed in Chinese, not the type of writing found in the hive. Kaylan continued, it is difficult for two human civilizations that are separated by countless light years to develop exactly the same writing even if they have the same roots. What's more, China Heavy Industries, such a famous enterprise on Earth, do you think that on Alpha Planet? Is there an existence with the same name as it? This can't be a coincidence. 33 followed Ian's words and shook his head solemnly. I think this cannot be a coincidence, so this first guess can only be completely rejected. Kaylan said, the other possibility is the paradox on the timeline. Wormhole. 33's eyes suddenly lit up, and he couldn't help holding his breath at the same time. The entire interstellar journey took 90 years, and there are detailed event records for each year, so there can be no problems. The only thing is that there is no record. The time is the time when the ark traveled through the wormhole. Yes, the wormhole is the bug of the entire timeline. Although in our understanding, it only took less than a year for the ark to travel through the wormhole, but who can guarantee that the time outside the wormhole will? Could it be that hundreds of thousands or even millions of years have passed? Beyond the ark, there might be a group of Earthlings who escaped, arrived at Alpha Planet in another way, and took root on this planet. If this is really the case, then why do the undead crew members hide everything? And why do Rooney and the others feel that they cannot disclose the truth to the people? Is it because of disaster? I think so. Kaylan nodded. The undead crew will not only want to digest the legacy left by human civilization and Alpha civilization, but they also don't want the seeds of disaster attached to this legacy to be on the ark. Spread. Although there are still many things that are not yet clear, this point should be correct. At least this is the original intention of the Undead Crew Association. But as an insider, there is no guarantee that the members of the Immortal Crew will not be swallowed up by the disaster. 33 frowned. It would be okay if they were all symbiotes like you. If they are just a group of ordinary human beings who have been transformed, then they will inevitably become the minions of disaster mentioned in that note. Kaylan glanced at 33, said nothing, and fell into deep thought again. I think the undead crew may have had a plan to replace them with symbiotes like you, which is why you can join the undead crew so smoothly. But now it seems that either some members are greedy for power and immortality, or some members have completely turned into that kind of thing, which is why the situation is so bad. 33 continued, if possible, I really hope you can replace the undead crew. Yes, at least you won't squander the lives of soldiers like us. That's not necessarily the case. Kaylan grinned and showed a wry smile. If you are not in my position, you will not seek to govern. If I had sat in that position, maybe my thoughts would not be the same as now. Human beings' views and concepts will always change with his position, status, and responsibilities. It is easy to say the 4 words of never forgetting the original intention, but how many people in history can do this? How many people can there be in history? At least you won't turn into that crazy monster, right? That's not certain. Well, let's not talk about this for now. What are we going to do next? Do we still want to go to the upper city area of the Hive City? 33 asked. Judging from the clues we have so far, this Hive City has not been able to survive the disaster. They escaped the fate of destruction in the face of disaster. It is estimated that it will be difficult for Shangcheng District to find any way to combat the disaster. Don't forget that we are not only in the Hive now, we are also in the Tower of Babel. Kaylan said solemnly. The so-called trial is still going on, even if the nest has been destroyed. If we want to enter the next level, we can only keep going forward. Moreover, I always feel that Babel will set this place as a level in the trial, and it will definitely not be that simple. I almost forgot, even if we don't go forward, there will only be endless sea water when we look back. Then we might as well see the relics left by the civilization that has the same roots as us. 33 looked at those things. The tunnel dwellers trapped in the space cage, what about these guys? Let them go, or deal with them. I still want them to lead the way, Kaylan said, waving his hand and releasing the spatial cage. Those tunnel dwellers did not pounce to attack Kaylan and 33. Instead, they turned around and ran away, plunging into the darkness deep in the tunnel. Follow me. Although the tunnel dweller can keep his feet upright, he still stays on all fours like most beasts when running at full speed. The long and thick rat tail stands high and is constantly swinging in small amplitudes, helping the body maintain balance while moving at high speed. They are very fast, but unfortunately they encounter guys like Kaylan and 33. Even if the former does not rely on Zelo's space power, he can easily catch up with his body comparable to a 9th level enhanced human. These tunnel dwellers. As for 33, his way of moving is even more fantastical, directly stepping on the nano alloy hand axe under his feet to fly with the axe. Although the steering is not very flexible and there is a risk of being thrown out, in the garbage channel, in this straight pursuit, his movement speed was not inferior to Ian's. Not long after, a piece of ruins with barely discernible outlines appeared in their field of vision. This ruins consists of dozens of shacks connected together, most of which have collapsed. Only a few shacks can barely be inhabited, but they are also covered with traces of repairs. Various garbage and white broken bones were scattered among the ruins. A faint fishy smell spread to Ian's nasal cavity through the filter cotton of the breathing mask. In addition to the tunnel dwellers who had just been released by Lan, there were still more than a dozen tunnel dwellers living in the ruins. Lan and 33-1 approached the ruins. These tunnel dwellers armed with various weapons, the residents immediately surrounded him. It seems that the battle is still inevitable, Lan sighed. He was actually not willing to fight these tunnel dwellers, especially after reading the note. If we can't communicate with them, we can only use force to solve the problem. 33 stood beside Lan, with hundreds of nano-alloy flying blades forming an inverted triangular shield in front of him. Pay attention to the 4 o'clock direction. There is a tunnel dweller there holding something that looks like a gun, although I'm not sure if that thing can still be fired, but it's always right to be careful. P.S. Thanks to Sopu for the 1,500 starting coins. Alien Relic Hunter author, and Chenmi-san. Chapter 904. The tunnel dwellers themselves were not afraid of their own combat prowess, but 33 felt that a certain amount of respect should be given to this thermal weapon invented by human civilization. Unlike the Ark immigrants who have been drifting in the universe for 900 years, struggling for energy and food, and did not begin to develop weapons technology until they found Alpha Planet, they arrived on this planet hundreds of thousands of years earlier than the Ark. There is no guarantee to what extent their weapons technology has developed during these hundreds of thousands of years. Those guns that look similar to the firearms of the old era, who knows what will be shot out are bullets, or lasers, or even, highly compressed plasma clusters. With their technology, there is every reason to believe that they can create individual weapons that can penetrate space barriers. Prioritize the targets with firearms and allow them to be killed. Lan nodded slightly. Leave it to me. 33 waved his right hand, and more than a dozen black flying blades silently shot at the tunnel dweller who was holding a weapon that looked like a firearm, and the latter also raised it very quickly. The gun was pointed at 33. Lan suddenly felt a strong sense of crisis. He didn't even bother to speak. He grabbed the backpack behind Sanchi-san and pulled him back. The next second, the ground where San was standing collapsed, forming a shallow pit about 10 centimeters deep. Although this pit does not look deep, you must know that the channel wall of Channel 4 is made of graphite sandwiched between 2 layers of lead alloy several meters thick. In order to resist radiation, its density and mass are extremely exaggerated. A 10 centimeter deep pit was instantly printed on the material. If 33 was still standing there, even if he was not crushed to pulp on the spot, all the bones in his body would definitely not be able to escape the fate of being crushed. As for the black flying blades shot by 33, because his operation was interfered by Lan, these flying blades that lost their balance completely lost their accuracy. Only 3 flying blades successfully hit the tunnel dweller, and it didn't hit any vital parts either. What the hell? 33 glanced at the shallow pit on the ground with lingering fear. This thing directly penetrated Zlogo's space barrier. That weapon that looks like a firearm can control gravity, Lan said, while dragging 33 back. The tunnel dweller holding the gravity gun repeatedly pulled the trigger and kept passing by the 2 of them. The location creates one collapse zone after another. In the blink of an eye, Lan and Sanzan-san had already retreated more than 50 meters. In this 50-meter wide open space, there were densely packed pits created by gravity guns, and the average height of the entire ground was covered. It was lowered by dozens of centimeters. Can that thing be fired so many times in a row? There is no energy consumption or overload problem, 33 said breathlessly, The feeling of being dragged around at high speed is not at all it was uncomfortable. The clothes made of special materials were very tough. They were originally designed to prevent wear and tear during action, but now the collar almost broke his neck. The attack, whirring, seems to have stopped. 33 touched the red and swollen circle of strangulation marks on his neck and said, "I didn't observe the other party changing ammunition or anything like that. It was still aiming at us with its weapon raised." Kaylan said, "It should be a matter of distance. Although the weapon is very strong, its range seems to be its shortcoming. If the range is still far, then this weapon is invincible." 33 covered his neck and shook his head vigorously. "There is no trajectory, no delay, you can hit wherever you point, you can't predict or avoid it, and no matter what, is it a physical shield or an energy shield, even a plug-in level space barrier can't stop it. The greater the mass of the target itself, the greater the lethality of this thing. I even think this thing can kill Lei with one shot." Beast. "The premise is that the user can get within 50 meters of the Thunder Beast," Kaylan added. "Weapons that can control gravity are indeed abnormal, but compared to the destructive power of Joker that can directly destroy an entire fleet with a single move, this kind of gravity gun created by the Hive civilization still has certain limitations. If I had known better, I should have asked the manager named Nieto what kind of weapons there are in the Hive. At least we won't be caught off guard like we are now," 33 said. "Just stay here and don't move. I'll go grab that thing." Before he finished speaking, Ian's figure disappeared from the spot. The body of a level 9 enhanced human is extremely powerful, and its explosive power and speed are comparable to a heavy tank equipped with an 8-cylinder engine. However, it is still difficult to escape the attack of the gravity gun. During this charge, Kaylan only relied on the 9-cylinder engine. It only strengthens the body's ability to resist blows. Of course, this anti-strike ability does not mean using the body to resist the gravity gun in the hands of the tunnel dwellers, but treating oneself as a human cannonball, using Z-Logo's space slingshot to continuously launch oneself out, and during the movement the mid to high frequency direction change makes it impossible for the tunnel dwellers to lock their position and predict their movement trajectory. This movement pattern is like a billiard ball bumping around on the table, except that this table there are invisible walls everywhere on the table, and every time the billiard ball touches these invisible walls, it will accelerate again. If someone with a slightly lower level of enhancement came here, he would probably have fainted the moment he was shot out as a human cannonball. The ground Kaylan stepped on continued to collapse, but the collapse could not keep up with his steps. Finally, when there was only 20 meters between him and the tunnel dweller holding the gravity gun, they both stopped. Down. Kaylan stopped because he no longer needed to dodge, and the latter was locked up by a pair of shackles that were invisible to the naked eye. Not only was the trigger of the gravity gun unable to be pulled, but any muscle and bone in the tunnel dweller's body was unable to move. He could only watch helplessly as Kaylan walked closer and pulled the gravity gun out of his hand. "Go out." The shape of this gravity gun is somewhat similar to the P-90 submachine gun from the old era, except that there is no magazine on top. Instead, there is a crystal pillar sealed in a glass tube, and the light is already very dim. The muzzle of the gun is not hollow. Looking inside, you can see the complex crystal structure and some designs that Kaylan can't understand at all, but the gun itself has almost no intelligence. It can't help but have no display screen and electronic sight. It's not even equipped with an optical sight. There are only 3 places on the entire gun that can be manipulated: the trigger, the safety, and the release button of the energy magazine. The entire gravity gun is filled with a strong mechanical industrial style. Although the internal structure is far more sophisticated than the most advanced electronic equipment on the Ark, from the appearance, it looks like a creation from the 20th century of the old era. Even the sights have extremely retro sights and gaps. Kaylan really doesn't know how this tunnel dweller managed to quickly lock and aim just now. He turned the gun over and found a series of badly worn inscriptions on one side of the trigger. Fortunately, the gun's shell was made of high-purity nano alloy. Otherwise, it would have been hundreds of thousands of years old. In the past, let alone these inscriptions, even the gun itself may have disintegrated. The content of the inscription is very simple, with only two pieces of information, namely Type 105 prototype gravity gun and only for use in the No. 2 weapon laboratory. It's actually a trial model, Kaylan couldn't help but exclaimed inwardly. After such a high-frequency attack just now, the reliability of this gun did not have any problems. What's more, this is a gun that is hundreds of thousands of years old. The weapons left behind, this alone is enough to show that the Hive civilization has an industrial level that is enough to crush the Alpha civilization. You know, many of the weapons excavated from the ruins of the Alpha civilization are no longer usable, especially this type of individual light weapons. The damage rate is almost 100%. Only a few can barely be used after being repaired, and their lifespan is only a few rounds. Even just one shot. It's a good thing. I'll accept it. Thank you, Kaylan said to the tunnel dweller who couldn't move. He turned off the safety of the gravity gun and stuffed it into the backpack behind him. At this time, 33 also came over. He glanced at the tunnel dwellers who kept making boss sounds but did not dare to rush up at all. He asked Kaylan, "What should we do with these tunnel dwellers?" "Ignore them for now, let's go directly to the upper city." After 2 hours of long journey, Kaylan and Sansan finally walked out of the No. 4 channel used to transport hazardous waste. As for the tunnel dwellers, they chose to give up after following them for several kilometers. Once again disappeared into the darkness. Compared with the lower city on the second floor, the upper city on the third floor can simply be described as magnificent, wide streets, tall and beautiful buildings, manors covering an area of more than 10 acres and retro-style townhouses. Even the wealthy areas on the arc seem a bit bleak compared to this level. What surprised Kaylan and Sansan the most was that unlike the pitch-black lower city, the entire upper city was shrouded in a layer of soft white light like sunlight. This made people hold a tactical flashlight in one hand and push the button in the other. Kaylan, who opened the entrance barrier, couldn't help but froze in place for half a second. But even though he was very curious in his heart, Kaylan still remembered the warning from Nieto, the manager of the lower city, "Don't look up at the dome. Can't look directly at the light source?" Could it be that the glowing things on the dome have been contaminated by disasters, and a few glances will increase the degree of erosion of the human body? Or is it that the light source itself is harmless, but there are other dangerous things attached to the dome? Kaylan really wanted to look up, but he resisted the urge and forced himself to cast his gaze on the ground in front of his feet. He didn't even dare to raise his gaze horizontally, for fear of seeing the dome coming into view in the distance. Before you have enough information, it is better to do nothing if you are going to die. The reason why Kaylan was so unsure was that after he stepped out of the tunnel, the spiritual connection between him and Ze-Lugo was forcibly removed. Ze-Lugo told Kaylan that there is a very special restriction in the space in the upper city. This restriction is a bit like the force field on the bridge of the Genoa. In this area, the ability will be completely disabled. Not only will it be impossible to use space power, but even the range of perception will be compressed to a distance of half a meter around the body. After losing his biggest trump card, Kaylan once thought about giving up, but after thinking about it again, he decided to move on. It would be difficult to discover more if they continued to stay in the lower city. Even if they did, Manager Nieto would never let them come into contact with anything related to forbidden knowledge. "Be careful, don't look up," Kaylan repeated this warning to 33, then took a deep breath, took out the gravity gun, and walked forward. It is also a garbage treatment plant. The environment of the garbage treatment plant in Shangcheng district is simply more luxurious than the most high-end buildings in lower city. The open space where the entrance to the passage is located is paved with perfectly polished granite. It's not the alloy plate with anti-slip patterns on the upper layer. There are rows of white Baroque-style stone pillars erected on the 2 floors of the open space. Every distance you walk, you can see a statue and an empty floor bead below the statue. Walking in this environment, Kaylan even suspected that this was not a garbage treatment plant at all, but the ruins of a temple on Earth, those gorgeous white stone pillars that had broken and collapsed, as well as incomplete statues and decoration of works of art. Ruins of this level are extremely rare even on Earth. However, considering the technological level of the Hive civilization, it is not difficult to create these things. It seems that it is not that the Hive is not developed enough, it is just that the living environment of the lower and lower hives is really poor. Just when Kaylan and Sansan walked to the door of the garbage treatment plant, a pleasant female voice suddenly sounded in the space. "Welcome both of you to Uptown. I am the administrator of Uptown, Nieto." The sound seemed to come from all directions, and Kaylan couldn't locate the source of the sound at all, but recalling the warning from Nieto in the lower city, he did not respond to the sound, but continued to lower his head in silence. "Go forward." The manager of the Uptown district, is also called Nieto, 33, whispered beside Kaylan. Could it be the same consciousness? Speaking of artificial intelligence, could it be possible to suffer from schizophrenia? I don't know. Kaylan shook his head, but Nieto on the second level told me not to believe anything the managers on this level say. It has been contaminated by disaster. She is lying, the female voice said suddenly. She is the one who was contaminated by the disaster. P.S. Thanks to Liz Wofen for the 100 starting coins.